You write a book after months of research. You double-check every fact, review your logic, and cite sources carefully. Each chapter makes a clear, well-supported claim. You believe every claim is true. But in the preface, you include a note. Despite my care, I expect that at least one claim in this book is false. You're not being modest for show. You know errors happen. But now you face a problem. You believe every claim in the book. You also believe that at least one of those claims is false. That creates a contradiction. This is the Preface Paradox. The tension here isn't about being careless or inconsistent. You've done your work. You're confident in each claim. If someone questioned you about chapter 3, you'd stand by it. You'd say it's true. Same for every chapter. And yet, your final belief is that something in the book is probably wrong. That belief is based on experience, not guesswork. Books often contain a typo, a misquote, or a subtle error in reasoning. That's why the final statement in the preface seems responsible. But when you put it all together, the beliefs clash. You hold each individual claim to be true. At the same time, you believe at least one of them isn't. That's the paradox. Both beliefs seem rational, but together they contradict each other. A similar problem shows up in other settings. Say a scientist runs 10 experiments. Each one follows a sound method. Each result is statistically significant. She trusts the process and the data. Still, she knows that error rates are real. She might think, one of these results could be a false positive. She trusts each outcome, yet expects that at least one may be flawed. This mindset shows caution, not confusion. But again, it carries that same contradiction. Some try to resolve the paradox by shifting how we think about belief. Instead of saying, I believe this is true, they say, I believe this is probably true. That change allows room for the error. If each claim has a 99% chance of being correct, the chance that all of them are correct drops. That lines up with your sense that a mistake is likely. But it raises a new issue. Do we ever really believe something 100%? Or is belief always a kind of bet? Others suggest belief is practical. If you act as if a claim is true, that's belief. You don't need certainty. You're willing to rely on it. Under this view, saying you believe each chapter while also saying one may be false isn't a paradox. It's just how humans reason. You trust what you write, but you keep room for correction. The Preface Paradox doesn't expose a failure of logic. It reveals the limits of how we hold beliefs. It shows how individual certainty can add up to collective doubt. Each belief fits, but the whole set pulls in opposite directions. A soldier wants to stop flying combat missions. He fears for his life and wants to be declared insane so he can be grounded. But there's a rule. If he wants to stop flying because the missions are dangerous, that means he's sane. The logic is tight. Only a sane person would want out of a deadly situation. So, if he asks not to fly, he proves he's sane and must keep flying. If he doesn't ask, he keeps flying anyway. Either way, he flies. That's Catch-22. The term comes from Joseph Heller's novel Catch-22. In the book, it describes a military rule that traps pilots in a loop. The paradox sits in the logic of the rule. It sounds reasonable when taken in parts. Wanting to avoid danger shows sanity. Only the insane can be excused from flying. But putting it all together creates a trap that no one can escape. You can find Catch-22 outside of war. Consider a recent graduate looking for work. Job ads ask for experience. But to gain experience, you need a job. Without one, you can't get the other. You're stuck. The employer says, we only hire people who've done the job before. But doing the job requires someone to hire you first. It's a closed loop. The condition for entry depends on already being inside. Or think about someone trying to build credit. A bank says, we can't give you a loan because you have no credit history. But to build that history, you need a loan to repay. You're denied because you've never borrowed, but you can't borrow unless someone lets you. Again, the logic is consistent in each part, but the result is a locked system. Catch-22 is powerful because it hides behind rules that seem fair. Each part makes sense alone, but together they create a no-win situation. People in these loops often feel like there's no point in trying to argue. If they point out the problem, they're told, "That's just how the system works." Another version shows up in mental health care. A person may seek help and be told, "If you're aware enough to ask for help, you're not that bad off." But those who don't ask may not get help at all. The very act of seeking support becomes a reason to deny it. The need is there, but the system defines the request as proof that the need isn't urgent. Catch-22 works by using your logic against you. It doesn't break rules. It wraps them so tightly that no options remain. Each step blocks the next. The trap isn't always clear at first. People follow rules expecting a fair outcome. But by the time they notice the loop, they're already stuck. They can't leave unless they prove they don't need to leave. They can't qualify unless they already qualify. The door exists, but it stays locked by design. You face two envelopes. One has twice as much money as the other. You choose one but don't open it. You're told you can switch. You start thinking it through. Suppose the envelope you picked has $100. Then the other could have $50 or $200. There's a 50% chance either way. If you switch, you might gain $100 or lose $50. So you figure 0.5 times $200 plus 0.5 times $50 equals $125. That's more than $100. You should switch. But the same logic works again if you switch envelopes. You're back where you started. Still, the math says switch, and it says that every time. This creates the paradox. The issue comes from the way you value the other envelope. You assume that because one envelope has double and the other has half, the expected value of switching always beats the one you hold. But something's wrong. If switching is always better even after you switch, then you should keep switching forever. That doesn't make sense. You can't improve your odds just by swapping back and forth. Let's step back. Say someone puts $50 and $100 in the envelopes. You pick one at random. There's a 50% chance you got either. If you chose the $100, the other has $50. If you chose the $50, the other has $100. Now the average value of the envelope you didn't choose is still $75. Same as the one you picked. So there's no real advantage to switching. The numbers balance out once you account for the setup. The paradox tricks you by blurring what you know. You don't know the actual amount in your envelope. You treat it as a fixed number but also let it represent both the lower and higher value in your calculations. That's where the confusion starts. If you call the amount in your envelope X, then the other might have 2X or X/2. But you just said X could be either the smaller or the larger amount. That inconsistency makes the math unreliable. Now imagine someone gives you an envelope and lets you peek inside. You see $100. Should you switch? Using the same logic, you think, if this is the lower amount, the other has $200. If this is the higher, the other has $50. So the expected value of switching is $125. You want to switch, but if you peek again and see $100 again after switching, you go through the same thought process. The urge to switch never ends. The key problem is in the assumptions. You assume equal chances between getting the lower or the higher amount without knowing how the amounts were chosen in the first place. If the amounts are fixed before you choose, and you pick one at random, the situation is balanced. There's no advantage in switching unless you have more information. Without knowing how the money was placed, the math that pushes you to switch fails to apply. It looks like logic, but it leads you in circles. A judge tells a prisoner, "You will be hanged at noon on a weekday next week, but the execution will be a surprise. You won't know the day until the executioner shows up at your cell." The prisoner thinks it through. He reasons it can't happen on Friday. If he's still alive Thursday night, only one day remains. Then he would expect the hanging Friday morning, which breaks the rule. It wouldn't be a surprise. So Friday is out. He rules out Thursday next. If Friday's not possible and he's still alive Wednesday night, then Thursday is the last remaining option. Again, he would know it's coming. So Thursday's out too. He keeps going and removes every day from the list. He concludes the hanging can't happen. But on Wednesday, the executioner comes. The prisoner is shocked. The hanging is a surprise. The judge's statement comes true. The hanging happens on a weekday. It's unexpected. The logic seems to fail, but the conclusion still stands. That's the paradox. The prisoner uses backward reasoning. He works from the end of the week toward the beginning. He assumes that if he can predict the hanging, then it can't happen. But this logic depends on each day being ruled out in a strict order. Once he eliminates Friday, the rest of his argument unfolds from that point. But something feels wrong. When the hanging happens, the prisoner didn't expect it, even though he had ruled it out. The judge's condition is met. The surprise works. One way to understand this is to look at how the prisoner mixes reasoning and expectation. He treats knowing something in advance as certainty. But humans don't work that way. We might think we've figured something out, but we still feel surprise when it happens. The prisoner expected to expect it, and that loop made him think it couldn't happen. But when it did, his previous reasoning didn't protect him from the shock. Think of a teacher who tells the class, "There will be a pop quiz next week, but you won't know the day until it happens." The students try to guess the day and eliminate each one for the same reasons. By Friday, they think it's impossible. But on Wednesday, the quiz arrives. They didn't expect it. The logic fails in the same way. Some say the paradox comes from mixing formal logic with everyday language. Words like surprise and expect don't follow the strict rules of logic. The judge's statement uses plain language that shifts depending on how the prisoner interprets it. You won't know becomes something the prisoner tries to prove. But surprise doesn't always obey logic. You can reason all you want and still be caught off guard. The unexpected hanging paradox shows how self-reference and expectation don't always mix. The more the prisoner tries to use logic to block the hanging, the more the surprise becomes possible. The loop feeds itself. His confidence in his argument becomes the reason it fails. You buy a ticket in a fair lottery with 1,000,000 tickets. Only one will win. You know the odds. It's almost certain that your ticket will lose. In fact, it's reasonable to believe that any single ticket will lose. If someone shows you ticket number 342, you'd say, "That ticket won't win." You'd say the same about ticket number 1, ticket hashtag 999, 999, or any other. You believe this about every ticket. But you also know that one ticket must win. That's the rule of the lottery. You end up believing that no ticket will win and that one ticket will win. That's the paradox. This is called the lottery paradox. It shows a problem in how we treat belief, probability, and logic. When the chance of something is very low, we often treat it as false. If the odds of a ticket winning are 1 in 1,000,000, it seems safe to say, "That ticket won't win." But if you say that about every ticket, you're saying something that can't be true. You know at least one ticket will win. So you've built a group of beliefs, one per ticket, that can't all be right. This creates a tension between what seems rational in parts and what fails as a whole. It feels fine to say each ticket will lose. It's unlikely anyone will win. But if you believe that about all of them, your set of beliefs leads to a contradiction. Suppose you're a judge reviewing a stack of job applications. Each one is highly unlikely to be the best. You look at application number 1 and say, "This isn't the winner." Same with number 2, number 3, and so on. For each one, your judgment seems fair. But if you treat every application this way, you'll reject them all. You know one should be chosen. The same kind of logic drives the paradox. One response is to say belief doesn't work like that. Maybe you shouldn't believe a ticket will lose just because the chance is small. You might expect it to lose, but that's not the same as believing it will. You can hold back and say, "It's unlikely this ticket wins, but I don't claim it won't." That avoids the paradox, but it also limits how belief works in everyday life. Another way to respond is to treat belief as a scale. You don't fully believe or disbelieve, you assign degrees of confidence. You're 99.9999% sure the ticket will lose. You treat that as good enough for most cases. But technically, you don't hold the belief that it will lose with full certainty. That lets you avoid saying something that's logically false, while still making useful judgments. The paradox forces you to think hard about what it means to believe something. Is belief just high confidence? Is it all or nothing? The lottery paradox doesn't just raise a puzzle about tickets. It highlights the challenge of making firm claims in a world full of low-probability truths. A man stands in the middle of a street. He's drunk. He takes one step at a time, either left or right, with equal chance. He doesn't remember where he's going. He just keeps stepping. This is called a random walk. It's a simple model, but it leads to strange results. If he starts one step away from a wall, and there's nothing stopping him on the other side, then sooner or later he'll hit the wall. Not because he wants to, just because randomness makes it likely. That's the drunkard's walk paradox. Now think of the wall as a boundary. Once he hits it, he stops. Say he starts one step away from it. He has a 50% chance of hitting it on the first move. If he doesn't, he's now 2 steps away. But he keeps moving left or right, step by step. No matter how far he gets, the odds say he'll return to the wall eventually. In fact, the longer he walks, the higher the chance he ends up back at the wall. Mathematically, it's almost certain. This seems strange. If the street is open on one side, you'd think he could just wander off and never come back. That can happen in theory, but in one dimension, with only left or right steps, it doesn't. The path loops back on itself. The longer he walks, the more likely he is to return to his starting point or to hit a boundary. He may take 100 steps or 1,000, but he'll come back. The paradox gets deeper in 2 dimensions. Now imagine the drunk man is on a grid, like city streets. He can move north, south, east, or west, each with equal chance. Again, he's likely to return to where he started, even if it takes a long time. But go up to 3 dimensions, add depth like up and down staircases, and suddenly he may never return. The rules stay the same. The random steps don't change. But just adding one more direction changes the outcome. That's the strange part. In 1 or 2 dimensions, he almost always returns. In 3 or more, there's a real chance he walks forever without ever coming back. It feels like a small change, adding one more direction, but the results shift completely. That's the paradox. Small changes in setup can flip long-term behavior. This model applies to more than a drunk person on a street. It shows up in stock markets, where prices shift up or down based on random forces. It explains how particles move in physics. It even shows up in search algorithms and gambling games. Randomness doesn't always mean chaos. Over time, patterns emerge, and sometimes those patterns lead back to the start. The drunkard's walk paradox shows that even simple choices, left or right, step by step, can lead to surprising outcomes. You expect randomness to spread out forever, but in some cases, it folds back in on itself and you return to where you began. A student asks Socrates how people learn things they don't already know. Socrates explains the problem through a question. If you know what you're looking for, you don't need to search. If you don't know what you're looking for, how will you recognize it when you find it? That's the paradox of inquiry, also known as Meno's paradox. It challenges the very idea of learning. If you try to learn something, you must start from somewhere. But if you truly know nothing about the subject, how do you even begin? If someone told you to search for a glarbin and gave no clues, you'd be lost. You wouldn't know what to look for. And if you stumbled onto it, you wouldn't know it was the thing you were supposed to find. Without some idea in mind, the process seems impossible. Now imagine a child learning what a triangle is. Before the lesson, the child doesn't know what defines a triangle. But the teacher draws shapes, some with 3 sides, some with more. The child starts noticing patterns. Eventually, she can say, "That's a triangle." So was she learning something truly new, or recognizing something she already had the tools to see? According to Meno's paradox, learning like this must involve some prior knowledge. Otherwise, she wouldn't even know where to start. Socrates offers a solution. He says learning is a kind of remembering. The soul already knows the truth, but it's forgotten it. Through questioning, you bring the knowledge back into awareness. This idea is called anamnesis. It sounds mystical, but it can be understood in simpler terms. Think of solving a riddle. First, you're confused, but then someone gives a hint. That hint helps you connect things you already know in a new way. You didn't get entirely new knowledge from the outside. Instead, you used what you already had to uncover something hidden. Modern learning often works this way. A student faced with a math problem might not know the answer right away, but they use related skills, addition, subtraction, patterns to work it out. They may not know the answer at the start, but they have enough background to explore. So the process isn't pure ignorance or full knowledge. It's guided discovery. The paradox shows the challenge of starting from zero. Real learning doesn't usually begin from total ignorance. It starts from fragments, partial knowledge, vague ideas, or simple examples. You ask a question, test answers, and refine your understanding. You might not know what you're looking for in full detail, but you know enough to make progress. In everyday terms, learning often feels like solving a puzzle with missing pieces. You don't have the full picture, but you can guess what fits based on shape and pattern. Meno's paradox reminds us that inquiry isn't just asking questions. It's having the right conditions to ask questions that can be answered. Fitch's paradox of knowability starts with a simple idea. All truths can, in principle, be known. That sounds fair. If something is true, we might not know it now, but someone could discover it one day. The claim is about possibility, not current knowledge. But when you look closer, this idea leads to a surprising result. If every truth can be known, then all truths must already be known. That can't be right. We know there are things we haven't figured out yet. Still, the logic seems airtight. That's the paradox. Here's how it works. Suppose there's a true statement, let's call it P. And suppose that P is not known by anyone. If every truth can be known, then the statement P is true but not known should also be something someone could come to know. But if someone does know P is true but not known, then P becomes known, and the not known part turns false. That means the person didn't know a truth after all. So the idea that P is true but not known can't ever be known, even in principle. This creates a problem. If P is true but not known can't be known, then not all truths are knowable. That goes against the original claim. But if every truth is knowable, then the statement P is true but not known must be false, which means P must be known. That leads to the strange conclusion that all truths are known. So the belief that all truths are possibly knowable seems to imply that they are actually known. That's Fitch's paradox. Let's say there's a fact about a far-off planet. No one has studied it yet. Suppose the fact is, there is water under the surface of planet X. It's true, but no human knows it. If you believe every truth is knowable, then someone should be able to discover it. But then the statement, there is water under the surface of planet X, and no one knows this can't ever be known. If someone learns it, then no one knows this part becomes false. So that kind of truth can never be fully known. Some people respond by saying we shouldn't treat knowledge as something that applies to individual cases like that. Maybe we should limit what counts as knowable. Others say the issue lies in mixing truth with the concept of being unknown. That pairing truth plus ignorance doesn't fit cleanly into the idea of knowledge. Another way out is to challenge how we understand the original claim. Maybe not all truths are meant to be knowable in that strong sense. Perhaps we can only say, some truths are knowable, or that we can hope to know many truths without claiming all of them are within reach. Fitch's paradox shows how a reasonable-sounding belief can lead to an extreme and false conclusion. It reminds us that when we deal with knowledge, even small claims about what's possible can shift into much larger statements about what must already be the case. Two brothers are born on the same day in the same year to the same parents. One is older than the other. At first, this sounds impossible. If they share a birthday, how can one be older? But the statement is both puzzling and, in some cases, true. The two brothers paradox plays with how we think about time, age, and the way we describe relationships. Start with twins. Most people assume twins are exactly the same age. But in reality, one twin is born before the other. That twin is older, even if only by a few minutes. If someone says, I'm the older twin, it's not strange. But if they say, we were born on the same day, and I'm older, it can sound like a contradiction. It's not. It just highlights how language and logic can pull in different directions. Now take a more extreme example. Suppose two brothers are born minutes apart, just before and after midnight. One is born at 11:58 p.m. on March 1st. The other is born at 12:03 a.m. on March 2nd. They are 5 minutes apart, but officially have different birthdays. Now reverse it. Imagine one is born at 11:59 p.m. on December 31st, and the other at 12:01 a.m. on January 1st of the next year. They're twins, 2 minutes apart, but born in different years. Yet no one would claim they're a year apart in age. This shows how timekeeping and language shape our view of reality. The paradox sharpens when we take it into a more abstract setting. Imagine two brothers on spaceships. One stays on Earth. The other travels near the speed of light for a year and then returns. Due to time dilation, explained by Einstein's theory of relativity, the traveling brother ages more slowly. When he gets back, he's physically younger than his twin. Now, the younger twin is actually older in terms of birth order, but younger in terms of age. This breaks the usual way we track who's older. It's not just about when you were born, but how fast you've moved through time. Or consider a legal case. A person claims to be the older sibling for inheritance rights. The birth certificates say the two were born minutes apart, but one was born in a country just across the international date line. Because of the time zone difference, their birth appears to happen a day earlier, even though in local time it happened later. The documents tell one story, the clock tells another. The two brothers paradox forces us to think about what it means to be older. Is it about who exited the womb first? Is it about how many birthdays someone has had? Or is it about biological age? The paradox isn't just about twins or clocks. It's about how small gaps in time, minutes, hours, or even years, can create confusion when matched against our expectations. We expect age and birth order to line up neatly, but under closer look, they don't always agree. Protagoras was a teacher of law. Euathlus was his student. They made a deal. Euathlus would pay Protagoras after he won his first court case. Until then, no payment. Euathlus finished his training but didn't take any cases. Time passed. Protagoras grew impatient and sued him for the fee. That lawsuit created the paradox. Protagoras argued like this: if I win, the court says Euathlus must pay me. If I lose, then Euathlus has won a case, his first, and by our agreement he still has to pay me. So either way, I get paid. Euathlus responded with his own logic. If I win, the court says I don't have to pay. If I lose, I still haven't won a case, so by our deal, I don't owe anything yet. Either way, I don't pay. Both arguments seem solid. They rely on the same facts but lead to opposite outcomes. Each side claims that no matter what the verdict is, their position still wins. That's the heart of the paradox. The case seems to create a loop where each outcome supports both sides. What makes this situation tricky is the agreement itself. The payment isn't based on a fixed date. It depends on a condition, Euathlus winning a case. But now the condition is tangled up in the current lawsuit. Is this case part of the original deal, or does it sit outside of it? That's not clear. Let's say the court sides with Protagoras. It rules that Euathlus must pay. That would mean Protagoras wins the case, but Euathlus hasn't. So under the terms of the deal, Euathlus still hasn't met the condition that triggers payment. Yet the court's decision overrules that. Now you have two claims in conflict: the legal ruling and the original agreement. If the court sides with Euathlus, it says he doesn't owe anything. That fits the contract, since he hasn't won a case. But that also means Euathlus has now won this case, which should trigger the payment. Again, the outcome contradicts the condition it's based on. This kind of paradox appears when a rule depends on something that also changes because of that rule. It's a loop of cause and effect. The court case is both the subject of the deal and the event that could fulfill it. A modern version could happen in business. Suppose a company says, you get a bonus after your first successful project. An employee completes a project and is told it doesn't count because the bonus rule was not in place yet. So the employee sues. If they win, the company says, now that you've won, you qualify for the bonus. But the employee might say, I shouldn't get the bonus because the court just ruled I didn't earn it. Each side can turn the result into support for their case. The paradox of the court shows how contracts and legal reasoning can fold in on themselves when the event they rely on becomes the thing under dispute. Each side builds a logical trap, and both seem to catch the other. You see many emeralds. Each one is green. You check hundreds, maybe thousands. All are green. So you form a rule: all emeralds are green. This seems like a strong prediction. It matches your evidence and your experience. But philosopher Nelson Goodman asked a question that changes everything. What if the rule you've been following is not as simple as it looks? He invented a new word: Grue. Something is Grue if it is green and observed before a certain time, or blue and not yet observed. So if you check an emerald today and it's green, it's also Grue. Fits both rules. But if you look at an emerald tomorrow after the set time and it's blue, it's still Grue. That's the definition. Suddenly, your past observations support the statement, all emeralds are Grue. That's just as true, based on the evidence, as all emeralds are green. This is the Grue paradox. It questions how we make predictions. Both green and Grue fit the data you've seen. Both rules explain the same past, but they predict different futures. One says emeralds will stay green. The other says emeralds will turn blue. So which rule should you trust? The problem gets worse because the words themselves don't help you. Green feels natural. Grue feels strange, but that's just habit. Imagine if you grew up learning Grue instead of green. Then someone says, what if emeralds stay green forever? You'd see that as the weird idea. We think we prefer green because it's simple, but Grue is just as simple when you define it from the start. It follows a clear rule. What feels normal is really just based on which words we learned first. To see how this works, take another case. Suppose someone tells you, all swans are white. You've only seen white swans. Then someone says, all swans are schmite. They explain, a schmite is white if seen before 2025 and black if seen after. So far, every swan you've seen is white and also schmite. But if you believe in schmite swans, then next year they should all be black. That doesn't match what you expect, but it fits the definition. Goodman's point is not about emeralds or swans. It's about how we choose rules. When two rules match the past, we need a reason to pick one for the future. But what makes one rule better than the other? Simplicity? Familiarity? Something deeper? That's the real question behind the paradox. The Grue paradox shows that prediction isn't just about matching past facts. It's about the way we frame those facts. The labels we use carry hidden rules. Two sets of facts can look the same but lead to opposite conclusions. So even in simple science, like checking the color of a stone, we rely on more than data. We also rely on the way we describe what we see. You want to test a rule, all ravens are black. That sounds simple. You go out and look at ravens. Each one you see is black. So you feel more confident that the rule is true. This kind of thinking is called confirmation. Every black raven supports the idea that all ravens are black. But Carl Hempel noticed something odd. The rule all ravens are black means the same as all non-black things are not ravens. That's just basic logic. If all ravens are black, then anything that isn't black can't be a raven. So if you see a green apple, it's not a raven. That should count as support for the rule too. But that feels wrong. How does seeing a green apple tell you anything about ravens? This is Hempel's Raven Paradox. It shows that logic and intuition don't always agree. According to logic, any case that matches the rule adds support. So a black raven confirms the rule. And so does a green apple because it matches the form. A non-black thing that isn't a raven. But we don't feel like the apple helps. We think only seeing actual ravens matters. Imagine a scientist wants to prove that all copper conducts electricity. She tests sample after sample. Each time, the copper wire carries current. Each test adds confidence. But suppose she picks up a rubber band. It doesn't conduct. That fits with, if it doesn't conduct, then it's not copper. Logically, it supports the rule, but it doesn't feel useful. She wasn't testing copper. This shows the gap between formal logic and how people gather evidence. In logic, every matching case counts. But in practice, some cases feel more meaningful than others. Looking at non-copper objects doesn't seem to help test the rule about copper. Looking at non-black objects doesn't seem to help test the rule about ravens. Hempel's paradox doesn't say the logic is broken. The reasoning is sound. It just shows that logical confirmation and scientific thinking can pull in different directions. In science, we want strong, direct support. Seeing a black raven is clear evidence. Seeing a green apple might technically count, but it's not strong. It doesn't tell you anything new. Another way to think about this is to ask how likely the observation is under different assumptions. If the rule is true, you expect black ravens. If the rule is false, you might expect to see a white raven. So when you see a black raven, it matters. But you expect to see green apples no matter what. So they don't change your belief much. The paradox helps explain why not all evidence feels equal, even if it counts logically. It reminds us that confirmation in real life isn't just about matching patterns. It's also about how relevant and surprising each case is. A black raven changes your view more than a green apple ever could, even if both technically confirm the same rule. Sleeping Beauty agrees to take part in an experiment. On Sunday, researchers put her to sleep. They toss a fair coin. If it lands heads, they wake her on Monday and ask her a question, then let her sleep through Tuesday. If it lands tails, they wake her on Monday, ask the same question, then put her back to sleep and wake her again on Tuesday to ask again. Each time she wakes up, they erase her memory of waking. So when she wakes, she doesn't know which day it is or how many times she's been woken before. Now the question. Each time Sleeping Beauty wakes up, the researchers ask, what is your credence that the coin landed heads? In other words, how likely does she think it is that the coin landed heads? The debate splits into two answers. One group says the answer is 1/2. They argue the coin is fair. Sleeping Beauty knew the setup. Nothing she learns upon waking gives her new information about the coin, so the chance it landed heads stays at 50%. The other group says the answer is 1/3. They argue that there are 3 possible situations where she might wake up: heads on Monday, tails on Monday, and tails on Tuesday. Only one of those happens if the coin lands heads. The other 2 happen if it lands tails. So the chance that she's in a heads waking is 1 out of 3. This creates the Sleeping Beauty paradox. Both answers seem to follow clear reasoning, but they lead to different beliefs about the same event. The question isn't about the coin. It's about how you count possible outcomes when you lose track of time. Let's look closer. If you repeat the experiment many times, half the time the coin lands heads and Beauty is woken once. The other half of the time, it lands tails and she's woken twice. So out of every 3 wakings on average, 2 are from tails and 1 from heads. If she thinks about the odds based on the experience of waking up, she should expect that most of her wakings are from tails. That supports the 1/3 view. But others say that's the wrong way to look at it. They point out that the coin is tossed only once. Beauty knew the rules ahead of time. Waking up doesn't give her any new evidence about how the coin landed. So her belief about heads should stay at 50%. They say the extra wakings don't change the probability of the coin flip itself. To make it clearer, imagine a simpler case. Suppose you flip a coin. If it lands heads, you wake Beauty once. If tails, you wake her 100 times. When she wakes, she doesn't know if this is her only waking or one of many. Now the chance that she's in a heads waking is 1 out of 101. The more extra wakings tails adds, the more likely she is to wake during a tails outcome. That shows how the number of wakings shifts the odds when you base them on experiences instead of just events. Tristram Shandy is writing his autobiography. He's very detailed. In fact, he takes 1 full year to write about a single day of his life. At that rate, he falls behind quickly. After 1 year, he finishes writing about the first day. But by then, a whole year has passed and many more days of life need to be written about. It seems impossible for him to ever catch up. This sounds like a simple case of bad time management. But now imagine he lives forever. He never dies and keeps writing forever. The question becomes stranger. Will he ever finish telling his story? Logic says he won't. For every day he lives, he needs a year to write about it. So as time goes on, the number of unwritten days keeps growing. he finishes writing about day 1 in year 1, day 2 in year 2, and so on. By year 10, he's only finished writing about his first 10 days alive. It looks like he's always behind, and getting more behind all the time. But look again. In year 1, he writes about day 1. In year 2, he writes about day 2. In general, in year n, he writes about day n. So by year 1 million, he has written about day 1 million. Even though he never catches up, every day of his life eventually gets written. Each delay is matched by a future year. That's the paradox. The paradox of Tristram Shandy plays with infinity. If he lives and writes forever, then for every day of his life, there's a year when he writes about it. So over infinite time, nothing is left out. But at any point in time, he is always infinitely far behind. His writing never covers his full life. Yet by the end of eternity, every part of it has been written down. This idea becomes clearer with numbers. Think of two lists. One is a list of all the days Tristram lives, day 1, day 2, day 3, and so on. The other is a list of all the years he spends writing year 1, year 2, year 3, and so on. You can match each day with a year. Day 1 with year 1, day 2 with year 2, and so on forever. This kind of one-to-one match is how math treats infinite sets. If you can pair every item from one list with exactly one from another, then the two lists are equal in size, even if they're both infinite. In real life, this sounds absurd. A person who falls a year behind each day would never finish anything. But in the world of infinite time, Tristram does finish every part. He just never has a moment when he's completely caught up. The paradox challenges how we think about progress and completion when time stretches without end. It shows that being always behind doesn't mean never finishing. With infinity, the usual rules don't always hold. A teacher tells the class, "There will be a surprise exam next week. It will happen on one of the weekdays, but you won't know the day until the exam is given." The students try to figure out what that means. They reason that if the exam hasn't happened by Thursday, then it must be on Friday. But if they know that on Thursday night, then it wouldn't be a surprise. So it can't be on Friday. Now they think about Thursday. If they've already ruled out Friday, and the exam hasn't happened by Wednesday, then it must be on Thursday. But again, that wouldn't be a surprise. So they rule out Thursday too. They continue this reasoning and rule out every day, Wednesday, Tuesday, and Monday. In the end, they decide that the exam can't happen at all. But then, on Wednesday, the teacher gives the exam. The students are surprised. The teacher's promise is fulfilled. The exam happens, and no one saw it coming. That's the surprise exam paradox. The students' reasoning seems logical. They assume that if they can predict the day of the exam, it won't be a surprise. So they try to eliminate every possible day by working backwards. But that process depends on an odd idea, that being able to predict the exam at the last minute counts as knowing it's coming. And that's where the trouble starts. Think about it more closely. The surprise depends on what the students expect. On Sunday night, they rule out every day. So by Monday morning, they believe the exam won't happen at all. If it shows up on Wednesday, they're shocked. That means their reasoning failed, not because the teacher broke the rule, but because their logic worked against itself. Here's another way to look at it. The students try to reason their way out of the surprise. But in doing so, they convince themselves that no exam will happen. That makes any exam surprising, no matter when it happens. Their own logic clears the way for the teacher to surprise them on any day. This paradox is similar to the unexpected hanging paradox. In both cases, someone is told to expect an event they can't predict. They try to remove the surprise through logic, but end up making themselves more vulnerable to it. The surprise works because their reasoning folds in on itself. You can also compare it to planning a birthday party for someone who knows a surprise is coming. If they think too hard about it, they might believe it won't happen on certain days. But the more they guess, the more likely they are to be wrong. If they finally convince themselves the party isn't coming, then the surprise works. The surprise exam paradox shows that knowledge and expectation don't always follow strict logic. Sometimes, trying too hard to predict something makes it easier to be caught off guard. The surprise depends not just on the event, but on how people think about it in advance. Consider this statement. This sentence is not known to be true. It looks simple, but it creates a logical problem. If the sentence is true, then what it says must be the case. It is not known to be true. That means it's a true sentence that no one knows. But if it's a true sentence that no one knows, then it is exactly what it claims to be. So it's true, but not known. Now flip it. Suppose the sentence is false. Then what it says isn't the case. It is known to be true. But if it's known to be true, then it must be true. That contradicts the idea that it's false. So whether you assume the sentence is true or false, you run into trouble. That's the paradox of the knower. This paradox is like the liar paradox. This sentence is false. If it's true, then it's false. If it's false, then it's true. The paradox of the knower works the same way, but replaces truth and falsehood with knowledge. Instead of asking what is true, it asks what is known. This shift brings the problem into the realm of epistemology, the study of knowledge. To see why it matters, imagine a system that keeps track of facts, like a database or a formal theory. If a sentence can be true but not known to be true, the system seems incomplete. But if the system is complete, then every truth must be known. That sounds good until you run into this paradox. Because if the system knows this sentence, then the sentence must be false. But the system only knows true things, so it can't know this sentence. Then it turns out to be true and not known. That creates a gap. Think about this in a practical setting. Suppose a teacher says, "There is at least one fact on the test that none of you will know." If that statement is true, then it proves itself. But if students somehow figure it out ahead of time and learn every fact on the test, then the statement becomes false. But then it must not have been true in the first place. So did they know it or not? Another way this shows up is in legal or secure systems. Imagine a password is meant to be unknown to everyone. If someone says, "The password is a phrase that is not known," then the moment they say it, it becomes known and no longer meets the rule. That's a real-world version of the same structure. Trying to describe something as unknown can make it known, which undoes the description. The paradox of the knower shows how knowledge can collapse in on itself when it tries to include statements about its own limits. Once you allow a sentence to talk about what is known, you invite loops and contradictions. Systems that aim to describe all knowledge must either leave something out or risk falling into paradox. In trying to know everything, they uncover a boundary they can't cross. A family sits together on a hot afternoon in Texas. Someone suggests driving to Abilene for dinner. It's a long, dusty trip with no clear reward. One person says, "Sure, sounds good." The others agree, not wanting to cause trouble. They make the trip, eat an unremarkable meal, and come home tired and uncomfortable. Finally, one person says, "That wasn't very fun." Another admits they didn't want to go in the first place. One by one, they all confess the same thing. No one actually wanted to go to Abilene. They only agreed because they thought everyone else wanted to go. That's the Abilene Paradox. This story explains a common problem in group decisions. People agree to a course of action that no one really wants. They do it because they assume others want it, and they don't want to stand in the way. So the group ends up doing something that's against everyone's actual wishes. It happens at work, in families, and in politics. A manager proposes a plan. The room is silent. No one likes it, but no one speaks up. Each person thinks they're the only one who objects. They don't want to seem negative or uncooperative. So the plan moves forward, and everyone leaves the meeting frustrated. Later, in private, they realize they all had the same concerns. But by then, the decision is already made. The paradox happens because of a gap between private belief and public behavior. People act in a way that hides what they really think. They don't lie exactly, but they avoid conflict. They say yes to keep the peace. Assuming silence means agreement. But when everyone does that, it creates a fake consensus. One reason this happens is fear of judgment. People want to avoid embarrassment or rejection. If you think everyone wants to go to Abilene, it feels risky to say you don't. You might worry they'll think you're difficult or antisocial. But if no one speaks honestly, the group ends up making a choice that no one stands behind. The Abilene Paradox shows that group failure isn't always caused by strong disagreement. It can come from too much agreement, especially when that agreement isn't real. People don't express their doubts, and that silence pushes the group toward bad decisions. To avoid this, someone has to break the pattern. It can be as simple as asking, "Does everyone really want to do this?" That question can make space for honest answers. Once one person speaks up, others often follow. They realize they're not alone. This isn't about blaming leaders or calling out individuals. It's about understanding how group dynamics can trap people. Even when intentions are good, the result can be a poor choice. The Abilene Paradox reminds us that good decisions need more than agreement. They need honesty and the courage to ask whether everyone's on board for the right reasons. Two sailors are shipwrecked in the middle of the sea. They both swim toward a single plank of wood, just strong enough to support one person. One sailor gets there first and climbs on. The other reaches it next and tries to grab on. The first sailor pushes him away to save himself, and the second man drowns. This is the plank of Carneades. The story raises a difficult question. Was the first sailor right to do what he did? He killed the other man by pushing him away, but he did it to survive. The paradox asks whether that act should be judged as murder, self-defense, or something else entirely. In normal law, killing another person is a serious crime. But here, the situation is extreme. It's not about greed or anger, it's about survival. There's no time to think through ethics or morality. The sailor doesn't want to kill. He just wants to live. So is it fair to hold him responsible? Some argue that what he did was understandable. In a life or death moment, people act on instinct. The law might not punish someone who kills in self-defense, and this case feels similar. There was no safe way to save both sailors. If the first man gave up the plank, both would die. If he kept it, one would live. That seems like the better outcome, even if it's tragic. Others say the act is still wrong. The second sailor had just as much right to live. The first sailor chose his own life over someone else's and used force to do it. He didn't act out of fairness. He acted to protect himself, even if it meant letting the other man die. That's not the same as defending against an attack. It's a choice between two lives. Imagine another case. Two mountain climbers are tied together by a rope. One slips and pulls the other toward a fall. The second climber cuts the rope to save himself. Again, one person dies and the other lives. Was the action justified? Or is saving your own life not enough reason to take another's? The plank of Carneades doesn't offer an easy answer. It shows how hard it is to apply normal rules to extreme situations. The law likes clear cases, right and wrong, guilt and innocence. But in this case, even the right answer feels wrong. One man lives, one man dies, and the survivor carries the burden of that choice forever. Some legal systems avoid deciding such cases altogether. They may say that the action, while tragic, isn't punishable. It wasn't done out of evil or carelessness. It came from a basic drive to survive. But others might insist that life has equal value, and choosing who dies should never be left to panic or instinct. The paradox forces us to think about justice not just in calm moments, but when everything is on the line. It asks how we judge actions when survival is the only goal and whether law can or should make room for that. You sit down to watch a movie for the second time. You already know what happens. The hero survives. The villain loses. The bomb doesn't go off. Still, as the tension builds, you feel the same suspense you did the first time. Your heart races. You grip the armrest. Even though you know the outcome, you feel anxious. That's the paradox of suspense. Suspense usually depends on uncertainty. You expect it when you don't know what's coming. Will the character escape? Will the door open to danger? The tension builds because you can't see what's next. But if you know what happens, there should be no suspense. Still, people feel it. This is where the paradox begins. One way to explain it is that suspense isn't only about not knowing. It's also about how stories are told. Even when you know what's going to happen, the pacing, music, and timing can stir emotion. A director holds a shot for just long enough. A character hesitates before opening a door. These details build pressure. You feel what the character feels, even if you know more than they do. Another way to look at it is to separate knowledge from experience. You might know the hero will survive, but in the moment you still feel the danger. Your body responds as if the outcome is uncertain. That's because suspense involves empathy. You put yourself in the character's place. They don't know what's coming, so you, as a viewer, react to their fear. The gap between what you know and what the character knows doesn't cancel suspense. It creates it. Think of a scene where a child walks into a room and you already saw a snake crawl under the bed. You know the danger is there. The child doesn't. Your knowledge creates a new kind of tension. You want to warn the child. You feel helpless. That's dramatic irony, and it can heighten suspense instead of weaken it. Now consider how this works in other forms. In music, a familiar song can still bring emotion even when you know every note. A roller coaster you've ridden before still creates a rush. Suspense might work the same way. It's not just about not knowing. It's about how the experience is shaped. Some philosophers suggest that suspense, like fear or laughter, isn't fully rational. You can know the facts and still feel a strong emotion. The body and the mind work on different levels. You might reason one thing, but your emotions don't always follow. The paradox also appears in books. A reader returns to a favorite thriller. They know how it ends, but still feel tension in the same scenes. That's because suspense builds from structure, not just surprise. A well-timed pause, a character's hesitation, or a subtle clue can restart the feeling even on repeat. The paradox of suspense shows that emotion isn't always about ignorance. It can come from how stories unfold, how characters react, and how deeply we engage with what's happening, even when we already know the ending. You cry when a character dies in a novel. You feel scared during a horror movie. You feel happy when two people fall in love on screen. But you know none of it is real. The people don't exist. The events never happened. Still, your emotions are real. That's the paradox of fiction. The paradox asks a simple question. How can we feel strong emotions for things we know aren't real? We usually feel fear, sadness, or joy in response to real events. If someone close to you is in danger, you feel afraid. If someone wins an award, you feel proud. These feelings seem tied to belief. You believe something is happening and you react. But with fiction, the belief part drops away. You don't believe there's a monster in the room. You don't believe the tragic character actually died. Yet you still react. You might even lose sleep or feel moved for days. Your body and mind respond as if something true just happened. But nothing did. So how is that possible? One answer is that we engage with stories on purpose. We agree to treat them as if they were real, at least while we're watching or reading. This is called suspension of disbelief. You don't actually forget it's fiction, but you choose not to focus on that part. You let yourself respond emotionally, even while you know it's pretend. Another view is that emotions don't need full belief. They just need enough information to simulate belief. For example, when you read, "A child is lost in the forest," your brain imagines that scene, pictures the fear, the cold, the dark. That image is enough to trigger concern or sadness. You don't need to believe it's real to feel the weight of it. Your mind fills in the rest. Think about a dream. You know it isn't real when you wake up, but during the dream, your emotions feel intense. You might feel panic, joy, or relief. Fiction works in a similar way. Your brain builds the experience, and your emotions follow the image, not the facts. You can also compare it to play. Children pretend. One says, "I'm a dragon," and the other runs away, laughing or screaming. They know it's not real, but the emotion is real in that moment. Adults do something similar with fiction. The difference is the setting: books, films, theater, but the emotional process is close. Some philosophers think the paradox shows that our minds work in layers. We can hold two things at once: the knowledge that something isn't real and the experience of it as if it were. One part of the brain keeps track of what's true. Another part engages with the story, the music, the visuals. The paradox isn't a flaw. It's a feature of how we understand and react to the world. The paradox of fiction shows how deep our connection to stories can be. We care about people who don't exist and events that never happened, not because we're confused, but because imagination can be powerful enough to feel real. You sit in a theater and watch a play where everything goes wrong. A hero loses everything. A child dies. The family falls apart. You know it's going to be painful, and yet you stay. Not only that, you say the play was beautiful. You leave moved, even grateful. This is the paradox of tragedy. Why do we seek out stories that make us sad? Most people try to avoid grief and loss in real life. Yet we willingly spend time with fiction that brings those emotions to the front. We choose books, films, and plays that break our hearts. We say we enjoy them. That sounds like a contradiction. One way to explain it is that tragedy offers a kind of safe sorrow. You feel grief without real loss. When a character dies, it's not someone you love, but you're still allowed to feel the sadness. That emotion comes without personal cost. It lets you experience something deep and meaningful, but from a safe distance. Another idea is that tragedy connects us to truth. In life, people suffer. Things don't always end well. A tragedy reminds us of that. It shows us that we're not alone in facing pain. Puts struggle into a form we can reflect on. We may not enjoy the sadness itself, but we value what it gives us. A chance to think, feel, and understand more. There's also a difference between pain in life and pain in art. In life, pain can feel senseless. It's raw, confusing, or cruel. In tragedy, pain has shape. It follows a path. Even when the ending is dark, the story has meaning. A tragic play or film lets us hold sorrow in our hands and look at it. It becomes something we can face, rather than something we must escape. Think about Greek tragedy. In Oedipus Rex, the king learns he has unknowingly killed his father and married his mother. The audience knows the truth before he does. Watching him discover it is painful but powerful. The story gives form to fear, fate, and guilt, things people carry in real life. The pain is not pleasant, but it feels honest. Or take a modern film where a character dies slowly from illness. Viewers often say they cried, but still call it one of their favorite films. That response seems odd until you consider what the story offered: an exploration of love, mortality, and dignity. The sadness becomes part of what makes the story valuable. Some philosophers say the pleasure of tragedy comes from contrast. The sad parts make the beautiful parts stand out more. When we see loss, we feel the weight of what mattered. We come away more aware, more human. The paradox of tragedy isn't about enjoying sadness for its own sake. It's about the way art turns sorrow into insight. Through tragedy, we feel something real even if the story is made up. We are drawn to it not because we enjoy pain, but because the pain helps us understand something we couldn't see any other way. Two generals plan to attack a city. Their armies are on separate hills. They must attack at the same time to win. If only one attacks, that army will be destroyed. The problem is they can only communicate by sending messengers through enemy territory. A messenger might get through or might get caught. They can't be sure. General A sends a message, "Attack at dawn." General B receives it, but B isn't sure that A knows the message got through. So B sends back, "Message received. Confirm you will still attack at dawn." Now A gets the reply, but A isn't sure that B knows A got the confirmation. So A sends another message, and the cycle continues. Each new message brings more uncertainty. No matter how many messages they send, they can't be completely sure that both sides are fully informed and agree to act. That's the two generals paradox. It shows the limits of coordination when communication is unreliable. Even if 99 out of 100 messages are delivered, that small chance of failure makes complete certainty impossible. The attack can only succeed if both generals are confident the other will move at the same time. But they can't get that confidence through a channel where each message might not arrive. No final message can guarantee mutual knowledge, because each confirmation needs its own confirmation. The paradox isn't about war. It's about coordination. It applies to computers, networks, and even everyday human plans. Imagine two people trying to meet at a busy train station. One sends a message, "I'll be at the north entrance." The other replies, "Got it. See you there." But did the first person get that reply? Should the second one wait for another message? If either person doubts the last message was received, the meeting might fail. In computing, this problem appears in distributed systems. If two servers must act at the same time, but can only send data through a network that sometimes drops messages, they face the same issue. One server sends a signal, the other confirms, but without perfect delivery, they can't know the full state of the other side. Engineers call this the problem of achieving consensus in an unreliable network. No protocol can fix the paradox fully. You can add retries, delays, or backup plans, but the basic problem remains. Uncertainty grows with each message. Every attempt to confirm just adds another point of failure. The system can never reach absolute certainty. Some systems work around this by accepting some level of risk. They may say, if we get no reply in 5 seconds, we assume the message didn't arrive and try again. That reduces risk but doesn't erase it. It's a practical solution, not a perfect one. The Two Generals Paradox shows that full coordination needs trust, timing, and reliable communication. If even one part breaks down, the whole plan can fall apart. In any setting where outcomes depend on perfect agreement, uncertainty in messaging becomes a serious obstacle. You live in a country with millions of voters. An election is coming. You care about the outcome, but you know your single vote won't change the result. The chance that your vote will decide the election is almost zero. Casting a vote takes time, effort, and maybe even money. So why vote at all? This is the paradox of voting, also known as Downs' paradox, named after economist Anthony Downs. It challenges the idea that voting is a rational act. If people are rational and self-interested, and if their vote won't make a difference, then it seems irrational for them to vote. But people still do. Millions of them. That's the paradox. Let's look at the numbers. In a national election with, say, 100 million voters, the chance that your one vote will decide the result is about 1 in 100 million. That means your expected impact on the result is so small it's nearly zero. If your goal is to affect the outcome, the cost of voting outweighs the benefit. So if people are acting based on personal gain, they should stay home. But most people don't. They show up, wait in line, and cast their vote. So why do they do it? One answer is that people aren't just motivated by changing the outcome. They vote because they feel it's a duty. They care about being part of the process. They want to express support for a cause, a person, or an idea. In this view, voting isn't about changing the result. It's about showing where you stand. The vote becomes symbolic. Another explanation is social. People vote because others expect them to. They want to be seen as responsible. If everyone around them votes, they feel pressure to join. Voting becomes part of group behavior, not just an individual choice. Some economists argue that the paradox shows a limit in the standard model of rational choice. That model assumes people only act to gain a clear personal benefit. But real behavior includes feelings, identity, and social ties. People value participation itself. So even if the direct impact is small, the personal meaning is large. Others try to reframe the payoff. They say even a tiny chance to change the outcome can justify voting if the stakes are high enough. For example, if the election affects laws on healthcare, taxes, or war, then the value of the result is massive. Multiply that by a small chance, and maybe it still makes sense to vote. This reasoning is complex, though, and doesn't reflect how most people actually think. Imagine a lottery with a 1 in a million chance to win a life-changing amount. People buy tickets anyway, not because the odds are good, but because the act of buying feels like hope. Voting can work the same way. It's a small act that connects you to something larger, even if the odds are low. The paradox of voting asks whether rational self-interest explains real behavior. When you break it down by numbers, voting looks irrational. But when you look at the bigger picture, values, community, identity, it starts to make more sense. Imagine a person prays for someone else, not for their health or safety, but for their soul. They ask God to save that person, even if it means their own soul will be lost. That's the heart of the Fenelon Paradox. It asks whether someone can truly act with complete selflessness, even in matters of eternal salvation. The paradox takes its name from François Fenelon, a 17th-century French theologian. He posed a striking question: Could someone love God so perfectly that they would accept their own damnation if it meant God's will would be done or another soul would be saved? First, this sounds noble, but it creates a conflict. If someone is willing to be damned for loving God so fully, is that not the very thing that should save them? In Christian theology, salvation is often seen as the reward for true love of God. But the paradox flips that. It asks whether true love means giving up even that reward. The person says, I love God so much that I would give up heaven if that's what love requires. But in saying that, they prove their devotion. That level of love is exactly what would lead to salvation. So the person who gives up heaven for love might get it anyway, which cancels the sacrifice. That's the paradox. You can think of it like a firefighter who runs into a burning building, knowing they may not survive. If they do survive, was the act still selfless? Yes, but the survival changes how we see the sacrifice. With Fenelon's paradox, the sacrifice is eternal. The person doesn't just risk their life, but their soul. Another example might help. A soldier throws himself on a grenade to save his friends. He doesn't do it for glory or reward. He does it because he wants others to live. That's a clear case of self-sacrifice. Now imagine a version where the soldier throws himself on the grenade, but by some miracle survives. Did his willingness mean less because he lived? Probably not. But what if we say that his survival must follow from his sacrifice? Then the action loses its cost. You can't sacrifice something if the act of giving it up means you won't lose it. That's what happens in the Fenelon Paradox. The person offers to lose their soul, but the offer is so pure that it guarantees they won't. You can't give up salvation if giving it up proves you deserve it. The act becomes impossible. Some thinkers say this shows the limits of moral logic. Others say it proves that true love must go beyond calculation. Either way, it pushes us to ask whether perfect selflessness is possible or even meaningful if the universe responds by canceling the loss. The Fenelon Paradox shows how ideals like sacrifice, love, and reward can twist around each other. It reveals a strange loop. To be saved, one must be willing not to be saved. But if you're willing not to be saved, then you are. Hintikka's version of the paradox of inquiry builds on an old question from Plato, but it shifts the focus. He looks at how questions work in logic and language. His version isn't about memory or the soul. It's about how we frame what we don't know and what we want to find out. The core of the paradox is this: to ask a question, you must already have some idea of what kind of answer you're looking for. But if you know that much, it seems like you already know part of the answer. On the other hand, if you truly don't know anything about the answer, how can you even form a meaningful question? Hintikka explores this by analyzing the structure of questions. Take a simple one: who stole the bicycle? To ask this, you already assume that someone stole it. You also assume that the answer will be a name or a specific person. You may not know who did it, but you know what kind of thing you're asking for. This shows that questions contain presuppositions, unstated ideas that must be true for the question to make sense. If no one stole the bike, then the question fails. So when you ask a question, you already assume certain facts. That means you aren't starting from zero. You're not completely ignorant. This leads to the paradox. If a question always contains some prior knowledge, can we ever truly inquire into the unknown? If we don't know what we're looking for, how do we know what question to ask? But if we do know what we're looking for, then maybe we're not really seeking knowledge at all, we're just checking something we already suspect. Think about a child asking, "What's inside a black hole?" That question already assumes that there is something inside a black hole and that it's possible to describe it. The child doesn't know the answer, but the question comes with built-in ideas about what kind of answer is possible. So even this question, asked in complete wonder, is shaped by background knowledge. Hintikka uses formal logic to show how questions work. He describes them as requests to narrow down a set of possible answers. To ask, who stole the bicycle, is to ask, which one of the possible suspects is the actual thief? So you're choosing from a known set, even if you don't know which one is right. The paradox becomes clear when you consider radical questions, ones where you don't even know what type of answer to expect. For example, what is the ultimate nature of reality? That's harder to frame. Without knowing whether the answer is physical, mathematical, or something else, it's not clear how to begin. Still, people ask. Hintikka's version of the paradox of inquiry shows that all real questions carry assumptions. We can't search for something unless we have some sense of what we're missing. But having that sense means we're already partway there. Inquiry never begins in total ignorance. It always starts with a shadow of the answer already in mind. You want to test the claim, all ravens are black. You start by looking at ravens. Everyone you see is black. So you feel more confident the claim is true. That makes sense. But then someone points out that this statement is logically the same as all non-black things are not ravens. If that's true, then every white shoe you see also supports the claim. That's the Raven Paradox. Now imagine this, you're holding a white shoe. It's not a raven. It's not black either. So it fits the pattern, non-black and not a raven. By the logic of confirmation, this should support your belief that all ravens are black. But it doesn't feel right. Looking at a shoe doesn't seem like good evidence about birds. That's the problem. The raven and the shoe paradox brings this idea into focus by comparing two cases. First, you see a black raven. That feels like real evidence. Second, you see a white shoe. Fits the rule but feels useless. Why does one count as confirmation and the other doesn't, if both match the logic? This challenges how we think about evidence. In logic, any case that fits a general rule should confirm it. So if all A are B is true, then every time you find something that is not B and also not A, it should count as evidence. But in practice, we don't think that way. We care more about how directly the example connects to the subject. Let's break it down. If you're testing all ravens are black, the most relevant examples involve ravens. Each time you find a raven and it's black, that's a strong case. But when you see a white shoe, it's far outside the main group. It fits the structure but not the subject. Feels like noise, not signal. You can compare this to other situations. Suppose someone says, all fire trucks are red. You go out and look at fire trucks. That makes sense. But if someone else says, here's a green bicycle, so that supports your claim, you'd raise an eyebrow. Technically, it fits the rule. Not red, not a fire truck. But it's not helpful. Some philosophers respond by saying that not all confirming cases are equal. A black raven gives strong support. A white shoe gives almost none. Both confirm in a technical sense, but one changes your belief much more than the other. So maybe confirmation depends on how surprising the observation is, or how directly it relates to the thing you're testing. Others argue that context matters. We only treat something as real evidence if it was likely to be found during a proper test. You wouldn't collect shoes while studying birds. So the white shoe, even if it fits the logic, doesn't belong in the same box as real raven data. The raven and the shoe paradox shows that logic and common sense don't always line up. In theory, any matching case should count. But in practice, we look for evidence that connects directly to what we're trying to learn. Seeing a black raven builds your case. Seeing a white shoe doesn't, even if logic says it should. A traveler sets out on a long walk from city A to city B. Each step she takes is small, so small that she doesn't notice any real difference between one step and the next. If you ask her after any single step, "Are you still in city A?" she says yes. One step doesn't change much. She takes another step. Still yes. This goes on for hundreds of steps, then thousands. At some point, she arrives in city B. But when exactly did she leave city A? This is the Sorites Traveler Paradox. It's a version of the Sorites Paradox which deals with vague boundaries. Sorites comes from the Greek word for heap. The original puzzle asks, if you take 1 grain of sand away from a heap, it's still a heap. But if you keep doing that, eventually you have no heap. The paradox is about when a clear change happens, when a small difference becomes a big one. With the traveler, the change is in location, not quantity. Each step is harmless on its own. It doesn't seem to change anything. But the total result is clear. She starts in one city and ends in another. The paradox is that no single step feels like the moment of change, yet change clearly occurs. This problem challenges how we think about gradual change. It asks whether a collection of small actions can lead to a big result, even when none of the actions seem important. If one step doesn't move her from Cydia, then how can a million steps do it? If every step keeps her in the same place, then logically she should never leave. But she does. You can see the same problem in other examples. Suppose someone begins to lose hair. One hair doesn't make a person bald, nor does the second or the third. But at some point, we say the person is bald. So where's the line? What's the exact moment baldness begins? Or imagine a student falling behind in school. Missing one assignment doesn't make a big difference. Missing another doesn't either. But over time, the pattern builds. The student fails. The change happens through small pieces, none of which feel like the turning point. The Sorites Traveler Paradox forces us to confront the idea that some terms, like incity or bald or heap, don't have sharp boundaries. They're vague. They depend on context, judgment, and comparison. That makes them hard to pin down with logic. One way to respond is to accept that some concepts are fuzzy by nature. There may not be an exact step when the traveler leaves City A. Instead, there's a zone where she's no longer clearly in A and not yet clearly in B. The labels become less useful in that space. Another response is to draw a line for practical reasons. A city might set a border based on a map. That doesn't solve the paradox, but it gives a rule people can follow. The logic stays messy, but the world keeps moving. The Sorites Traveler Paradox shows that change doesn't always come with clear signals. Sometimes, big shifts happen through small, unnoticed steps until you look back and realize everything's different. You commit a terrible act. You feel guilt, regret, and shame. A doctor offers you a pill that erases all memory of what you did. You take it. The next day, you wake up with no memory of the act and no bad feelings. You live as if it never happened. The question is, are you still responsible? This is the Memory Erasure Paradox. It asks whether guilt or moral responsibility depends on memory. If you no longer remember doing something wrong, can you still be blamed for it? If punishment is meant to correct behavior, what happens when the person being punished doesn't even recall the action? One way to think about this is by comparing it to sleepwalking. Suppose someone harms another person while sleepwalking. They didn't intend to do it. They have no memory of it. We usually don't hold them morally responsible. But in the case of memory erasure, the situation is different. The person chose to erase the memory. They once knew what they did and chose to forget. That choice matters. It shows a wish to escape the weight of guilt. But does forgetting free someone from responsibility? If a criminal erases the memory of a crime, are they still a criminal? If a witness forgets what they saw, is the event erased from history? The paradox becomes sharper when you think about punishment and justice. Suppose a person is sentenced to prison for a crime, but their memory is wiped before they serve the time. They no longer remember the motive, the act, or the trial. They feel no remorse. Is the punishment still valid? Are we now punishing a different person, someone who lacks the mental link to the crime? Imagine a man who abuses his partner, then takes a pill that wipes the memory each time. He never remembers doing it. He feels no guilt. Should society treat him as innocent each time? Or is memory not what matters, only the actions themselves? Now flip it. Suppose someone is punished for a crime they didn't commit, but they're made to believe they did it. They carry guilt for years. Their memories tell them they are responsible. Does that false memory create real guilt? If so, maybe memory plays a larger role in moral judgment than the actual facts. Some philosophers say responsibility depends on continuity of character. If you are the same person in body and identity, you remain responsible even if your mind changes. Others argue that moral agency depends on awareness. If you don't remember doing wrong, you can't reflect, feel remorse, or grow from the experience. The Memory Erasure Paradox raises difficult questions about identity, ethics, and justice. It challenges the idea that punishment or forgiveness makes sense without memory. If we remove the past from someone's mind, do we also remove the moral weight that goes with it? Or is guilt something deeper than memory, something that stays even when we no longer know why? A group of friends goes out to eat. Before the meal, they agree to split the bill evenly. That way, no one has to do the math at the end. But once they look at the menu, something strange happens. Each person starts thinking about what to order, and the way they think changes because of the deal. If you know you're only paying part of your own meal, the cost matters less. Suppose a steak costs $30 and a salad costs $15. If you're paying for your own meal, the $15 difference matters. But if the bill is split 4 ways, that difference becomes $3.75. So the steak seems like a better deal. One person orders it, then the others do the same. No one wants to be the one who pays more and gets less. In the end, everyone orders more expensive items, and the total bill is higher than if each person had paid for themselves. That's the diner's paradox. Everyone tries to get the best deal under the shared bill, but the group ends up worse off. If they had each paid for their own food, they might have ordered cheaper meals. But because they split the cost, they all spend more. The deal meant to keep things fair ends up making things worse. This problem is a version of what's called the tragedy of the commons. In that case, individuals use more of a shared resource than they need because the cost is spread across the group. It happens with shared office snacks, public land, and in this case, the group bill. Each person's choice seems harmless, but the combined effect is costly. Let's take a closer look. Say there are 5 diners. One diner sees a $20 dish and a $30 dish. The $10 difference is split 5 ways, so the added cost to each person is only $2. That makes the $30 dish feel like a smart choice. But if everyone thinks the same way, the table spends $50 more than it needed to. Each diner gets a slightly better meal, but everyone pays more for it. You can even imagine 2 identical meals. One priced at $18 and one at $24. The more expensive one includes a side no one really wants. But if the extra cost is spread out, each person might think, why not? In chasing a small gain for themselves, they cause a larger loss for the group. One way to solve the problem is to have each person pay for their own meal. That puts the full cost of each choice on the person making it. Another way is to agree to limit choices or set a price range. But that takes planning and honesty. The diner's paradox shows how group decisions can go wrong when people make choices based on shared cost. Each person acts in their own interest, but those choices add up in a way that no one intended. It's a clear case where a fair rule, splitting the bill, can lead to unfair results. You have a single grain of sand. That's not a heap. You add another grain. Still not a heap. You keep adding 1 grain at a time. 10 grains, 50, 100. At some point, you have a heap. But when exactly did it become one? You can't point to a single grain and say, this one made it a heap. That's the paradox of the heap, also known as the Sorites paradox. It works the other way too. Start with a clear heap of sand. Now remove 1 grain. Still a heap. Remove another. Still a heap. Keep going. At what point does it stop being a heap? Again, there's no clear answer. You can remove grains one by one until you're left with only a few, and yet no single step felt like the moment the heap disappeared. This paradox shows how language struggles with vague terms. Words like heap, bald, tall, or rich don't have sharp edges. There's no exact number of hairs that make someone bald, or exact amount of money that makes someone rich. We use these terms in daily life and they work most of the time, but when we push them into logical situations, they fall apart. Take bald as an example. If a person with no hair is bald, then someone with 1 hair probably still counts as bald. Add 1 more and they still seem bald. But keep adding 1 hair at a time, and eventually that person clearly isn't bald. Yet no single hair seems to make the difference. That's the same structure as the heap problem. One way to respond is to accept that these terms are vague. They don't have fixed borders. Instead, they work in ranges. You don't need an exact number to call something a heap. It's enough that most people would agree at a certain point. The concept is flexible, not precise. But that leads to another problem. If we accept vagueness, how can we reason clearly about anything? Logic likes clear rules. If removing 1 grain never changes something from a heap to a non-heap, then it seems we could remove every grain and still have a heap. but that's clearly false. So something in the logic or the definition must be wrong. Some philosophers suggest that we stop using strict true or false rules for vague terms. Instead, we can use degrees. A pile can be definitely a heap, sort of a heap, or definitely not a heap. That lets us talk about borderline cases without needing a sharp line. But it also changes how we use logic. We move from black and white to shades of gray. Others say the paradox isn't really about language at all. It's about how people expect precision where none exists. In daily life, we don't ask when a heap starts, we just know one when we see it. The problem only shows up when we force everyday words into strict systems. The paradox of the heap shows that even basic words can raise deep questions. When does something become something else? If no single change makes the difference, how does change ever happen? It's a puzzle built from ordinary things, but it's hard to solve. Two men get arrested for a serious crime. The police have enough evidence to charge them with a lesser offense, but not the major one, unless one of them talks. So they separate the prisoners and offer each the same deal. If you confess and your partner stays silent, you go free and he gets 10 years. If you both confess, you each get 5 years. If you both stay silent, you both get 1 year on the lesser charge. Neither man knows what the other will do. Each must decide alone. The first prisoner thinks it through. If his partner stays silent, then confessing sets him free. If his partner confesses, then staying silent gives him 10 years, but confessing means only 5. So either way, he's better off confessing. The second prisoner reasons the same way. Both confess. They each get 5 years. But if they had both stayed silent, they would have gotten 1 year each. They each act to protect themselves and end up worse off than if they had trusted each other. That's the prisoner's dilemma. This paradox shows how rational choices can lead to bad outcomes. Each prisoner chooses what seems best for himself, given the uncertainty. But the result hurts both of them. The logic of self-interest breaks down when decisions affect more than one person. You can see this same structure in everyday life. Two businesses compete by cutting prices. If both hold steady, they earn good profits. But if one cuts prices while the other doesn't, the one that cuts gets more customers. So each company has an incentive to lower prices. In the end, both do. Their profits shrink. They could have done better by holding back, but the fear of losing out drives them to compete. Or think of roommates and chores. If everyone cleans, the house stays nice. But cleaning takes effort. If you think your roommate will clean, you might skip it. If they think the same, no one cleans. The place gets messy. Each person does what feels best for them, and everyone ends up worse off. In the prisoner case, communication might help. If the two could promise to stay silent, they might trust each other. But without a guarantee, the safer move is to talk. The fear of being betrayed makes cooperation hard. Game theorists study problems like this to understand cooperation, trust, and conflict. The prisoner's dilemma shows how hard it is to make good choices when you can't rely on others. Even when working together is clearly better, individual fear can break the system. The dilemma also raises moral questions. Should you protect yourself knowing it might harm someone else? Or take a risk for the greater good? There's no easy answer. That's why the scenario remains one of the most studied problems in logic and ethics. It's not just about crime. It's about how we make choices when our fate is tied to others. A kingdom is at war. A trusted messenger is sent with a letter from the king to a general at the front. The messenger travels day and night. The journey is long, and halfway there he stops to rest. While he sleeps, the king dies, and the war ends. Peace is declared, but the messenger doesn't know. He wakes up and continues the mission as if nothing changed. He believes he carries vital orders. He delivers the letter. The general reads it and prepares for battle, unaware that it no longer makes sense. This is the sleeping messenger paradox. It shows what happens when someone acts on old information that once was true, but no longer is. The messenger did his job. He was loyal, fast, and careful, but the world changed while he slept. By the time he completed the task, the facts had shifted. His success became a failure. This paradox challenges how we think about knowledge and truth over time. Is the messenger responsible for delivering false information? At the time he received the letter, it was accurate. He acted in good faith. But the moment the king died, the letter no longer matched reality. So what does it mean to act on outdated truth? You can see this same problem in modern life. Think of a news article based on early reports. Spreads online, fast and wide. Later, the facts change, but the article keeps circulating. People read it, believe it, and act on it, even though it's no longer true. Like the sleeping messenger, the message arrives too late to be useful, but people still trust it. Or imagine a satellite system giving directions. A road closes after a flood, but the map hasn't updated yet. A driver follows the route into danger, trusting the system. The directions were once correct. Now they lead the wrong way. The message is old, but the receiver treats it as current. In the paradox, timing is everything. A message doesn't just carry facts. It carries facts meant for a certain moment. When the world moves on, a delay can turn truth into error. That's not because the message was false, but because time changed the context. Some systems deal with this by adding expiration. Prescription has a date. Code has a window, but not every message comes with a warning. Often, we trust what we hear or read without asking, is this still true? The sleeping messenger paradox shows the gap between knowing something and knowing that it still matters. A message, like an action, belongs to its moment. Once that moment passes, the meaning can shift or vanish. The messenger's task didn't change, but the world did. He kept his promise. Yet his delivery caused harm, not because he lied, but because he didn't know the truth had moved on. You look into a mirror and raise your right hand. Your reflection raises its left. The image flips left and right, but not up and down. That seems normal until you stop and ask why. A mirror doesn't turn you sideways. It reflects light straight back. So why does your image seem reversed left to right, but not top to bottom? This is the start of the mirror universe paradox. It challenges how we understand reflection, space, and perception. The mirror doesn't know left from right. It just bounces light. If you stand facing north, your reflection also faces north. The front of your body becomes the front of the image. There's no true flip. So why does it feel like the image has switched sides? The answer has more to do with how we think than with how mirrors work. In real life, if someone turns to face you, they rotate. Their right side ends up on your left. So when we see our reflection, we assume the same kind of rotation has happened. We treat the image as if it's another person facing us. That's where the left-right switch comes from. But it's not the mirror doing it. It's our brain. Now imagine a full mirror universe. Everything is mirrored, not just visually, but physically. Every particle, movement, and interaction is reversed. A handshake in our world would involve the left hand in the mirror world. A clock there would run counterclockwise. But from inside that mirror world, no one would notice. To them, everything feels normal. Their left is their left. Their physics matches their experience. Here's where the paradox grows. If the mirror world is completely reversed, and if no one inside it can tell the difference, then is it really different at all? Can you ever know which version of the universe you're in? If you lived your whole life in the mirror world, you'd never feel out of place. You'd learn to read mirrored text, walk in mirrored streets, and write with your left hand if you're right-handed here. To you, it would feel the same. You can even take this further. Imagine trying to send a message to the mirror universe. Would your signal flip? Would a mirrored person decode it correctly, or see it as reversed nonsense? Without a shared frame of reference, even simple directions might break down. Turn right in your universe might mean turn left in theirs. Physics adds more layers. Some processes in nature don't care about direction, like gravity. Others, like certain particle decays, do. They violate what's called parity symmetry. That means the laws of physics don't always work the same in a mirror-reflected world. This suggests that a perfect mirror universe might not behave exactly like ours. The mirror universe paradox asks whether we can ever separate what's truly different from what just looks different. If your world flipped and you flipped with it, would you ever know? When your reflection raises its opposite hand, the mirror isn't playing a trick. You are. You want to know what's true. To do that, you need a method, a way to tell true from false. But to test any method, you need to already know some truths. That leads to the problem of the criterion. It asks two basic questions. What do we know? And how do we know it? The trouble is, you can't answer one without already answering the other. Suppose someone claims a fact. The Earth orbits the Sun. How do you know it's true? You might say, science proved it. But then you're using a method, scientific reasoning. So you're assuming that method is reliable. But how do you know that science is a reliable way to find truth? You'd need to test it against known truths. But now you're back to needing a list of truths before you can trust the method. This creates a circle. To know what's true, you need a method. To trust the method, you need known truths. But if you don't have either to start with, where do you begin? There are three main responses to this problem. The first says, start with the method. Once you have a reliable way of knowing, you can build your list of truths. But this requires faith in the method before you've tested it, which can feel shaky. The second says, start with what you know. If some things seem obviously true, maybe you can work backward and figure out what method fits. But then you're trusting your list without first checking how you got it, which also feels weak. The third response is skeptical. It says you can't solve the problem at all. You're stuck, since you can't know the method without knowing the facts, and can't know the facts without the method. Knowledge may not be possible. You can see this in everyday life. Suppose someone tells you a news story. You ask, is this a reliable source? They say yes because the story is true. But when you ask how they know the story is true, they say, because it came from a reliable source. That circular logic mirrors the problem of the criterion. Or imagine a student learning history. She asks, how do I know this textbook is accurate? The teacher says, because it's based on true events. But she then asks, how do we know those events are true? The answer, because they're in the textbook. Again, the reasoning loops. Philosopher Roderick Chisholm gave the problem its modern form. He didn't solve it, but he showed why it matters. If we can't find a starting point, then every claim we make may hang in midair, without solid ground. The problem of the criterion pushes us to think hard about the roots of knowledge. How do we decide what's true? Do we begin with trusted methods, trusted beliefs, or admit we can't begin at all? Each choice shapes what we count as knowledge and what we leave out. A clock breaks and starts ticking backward. It still moves at the normal pace, 1 tick per second, but the hands now move in reverse. Most people would say this clock is worse than a stopped one. A stopped clock is right twice a day. The backward one never seems to be right. But here's the twist. Depending on how you define right, the backward clock might actually give correct readings more often than the stopped one. That's the paradox of the backward clock. Start with the stopped clock. It's stuck at, say, 6 o'clock. Every day, it's exactly right at 6 a.m. and 6 p.m. It doesn't move, so it never drifts into error, but it also doesn't help you the rest of the time. Now think about the backward clock. If it's running at a normal speed in reverse, it completes a full backward cycle every 12 hours. That means once every 12 hours, it shows the correct time, but not at the real time it claims. For example, if the real time is 3 o'clock, the backward clock might say 9 o'clock. That seems useless. But here's where the paradox gets interesting. Suppose someone doesn't know the clock is running backward. They look at it, believe what they see, and go about their day. They check it over and over again. Occasionally, they happen to act at the right time, when the backward clock shows a time that, by pure chance, matches what they need to do. They get lucky. Now suppose another person looks at the stopped clock. They know it's broken, but they also know it's right twice a day. Still, they can't use it to schedule anything unless they know what time it is in some other way. It has no motion, no pattern, no hope of helping unless they're very lucky or already informed. Now switch to a new angle. Let's say you're forced to rely on one of these clocks over a long period, but you're not told which is which. You look at each clock over time. The stopped one always says 6 o'clock. Eventually, you stop trusting it. But the backward one is always changing. It at least tells you something new each moment. If you spot a pattern, you might figure out how to adjust. If it says 2 o'clock and you learn it's 10 o'clock in real time, you start to reverse the reading. It becomes useful, more useful than the stopped one. The paradox lies in our expectations. A stopped clock seems more trustworthy. It's clearly broken, but it gives exact results at rare moments. The backward clock seems more chaotic, but if you can spot the pattern, you can work with it. It's wrong in an organized way, and that structure can be more helpful than something that's perfectly right only by chance. The paradox of the backward clock challenges how we think about truth, error, and usefulness. It asks whether consistent wrongness can, in some ways, be better than rare and random correctness. A man stands up and says, "I cannot speak a word of English." The moment he says it, his claim defeats itself. He used clear English to make the statement. If what he said is true, he couldn't have said it. That's a self-defeating belief. The self-defeating belief paradox shows up when someone makes a claim that cancels itself out just by being expressed. The words undermine the meaning. The statement collapses under its own weight. Take another example. There is no truth. If that sentence is true, then it must itself be true. But that would mean at least one truth exists, the truth that there is no truth. That's a contradiction. If the sentence is false, then there is truth. Either way, the statement can't stand on its own. Or consider, you should doubt everything. If you take that seriously, you have to doubt the statement itself. Should you doubt the advice to doubt? If yes, then maybe you shouldn't doubt everything. If no, you've made an exception. The belief defeats itself. These types of claims break down because they apply to themselves. They are self-referential. That's what makes them different from regular false statements. A false claim might just be wrong. A self-defeating one is impossible. It destroys its own foundation. You can find examples in everyday situations. Suppose someone says, "Words have no meaning," but they're using words to say it. If the sentence had no meaning, you wouldn't understand it. But you do. So the statement relies on the very thing it tries to deny. Another case, no one can know anything for sure. But how do you know that for sure? If your belief is that all beliefs are uncertain, then your belief in that very idea is uncertain too. It doesn't disprove itself directly, it just makes itself unreliable. These beliefs create problems in philosophy, science, and even regular conversation. They often look bold or clever, but when you examine them, they fold in on themselves. They don't just fail to prove a point, they make their own point impossible. Sometimes, people fall into these beliefs without meaning to. They try to sound skeptical or humble. They say things like, "We can never really know anything," but if that were true, we couldn't even know that statement. Total doubt blocks even the act of doubting. One way to deal with this is to recognize limits. A claim should not cancel itself. It can question many things, but not the ground it stands on. A belief must at least make room for its own expression. Otherwise, it cuts the branch it's sitting on. The self-defeating belief paradox shows the importance of consistency. A statement that turns against itself isn't deep. It's broken. It teaches us to test not just what a belief says about the world, but what it says about itself. If it can't survive its own rules, it doesn't hold. A man enters a contest where the rules clearly forbid cheating. He cheats, but then openly admits it. He tells the judges exactly what he did, how he did it, and why. He says he broke the rules but wanted to be honest about it. The judges are confused. Is he more trustworthy because he told the truth, or less because he broke the rules? That's the honest cheat paradox. The paradox appears when someone breaks a rule but doesn't try to hide it. Instead, they admit the wrong openly. In some cases, people admire that. They say, "At least he owned up to it." In other cases, the honesty makes things worse. A hidden mistake might be forgiven. Proud admission feels like a challenge. This tension shows up in schools. Imagine a student who copies from a classmate during a test, then turns in a note with the exam. "I cheated on this. I didn't study, and I thought it was better to tell the truth than lie about it." The teacher now faces a problem. Should they punish the cheating or reward the honesty? The student broke the rule but showed a kind of moral courage by admitting it. The same situation can happen in sports. An athlete uses a banned substance, then tells the press without being caught. Some fans say that takes integrity. Others say it's still cheating, and the confession is a distraction. If someone gains from breaking the rules, does their honesty cancel that gain? Or does it just make them a more clever cheat? In philosophy, this paradox challenges how we measure moral worth. If someone cheats but doesn't lie, are they better than someone who cheats and hides it? Does telling the truth after doing wrong make the act less wrong, or just easier to accept? One way to look at it is through trust. A person who lies and cheats destroys trust completely. A person who cheats but tells the truth might still seem trustworthy in other ways. You might not trust them to follow rules, but you trust them to tell you what they did. That creates a strange kind of respect. You believe what they say even though what they did was wrong. But that kind of honesty can also be used as a tool. A person might confess just to seem brave. They take control of the story. Yes, I cheated, but I'm not a liar. That frames them as bold, not guilty. The admission becomes part of a strategy, not a moral stance. The honest cheat paradox raises questions about motive. Why is the person confessing? Are they trying to do the right thing or just avoid worse consequences? The answer often depends on timing. A confession before being caught feels different from one made after. Voluntary honesty carries weight. Forced honesty feels like damage control. This paradox shows how actions and values can pull in opposite directions. Honesty is good. Cheating is not. But when someone does both at once, the judgment isn't simple. The truth may not undo the wrong, but it still matters. A scientist shows you a button. She says, "If you press this button, something very good will happen to someone in another part of the world. You won't know who, and you'll get nothing in return. Also, no one will ever know whether you pressed it." You ask, "What happens if I don't press it?" She says, "Nothing. Life goes on." Sounds like an easy choice. Pressing the button helps someone and costs you nothing. But now the scientist adds one more detail. Every time this button is pressed, the world becomes just a little worse in some small, invisible way. Not enough to notice right away, but enough that, if everyone keeps pressing the button, things slowly fall apart. That's the button paradox. The paradox lies in the conflict between individual and collective action. For you alone, pressing the button seems good. You help someone. You do no clear harm. But if millions of people make the same choice, each one pressing the button just once, the hidden damage builds. In the end, the world suffers. This mirrors real-world problems like pollution, overfishing, and data privacy. One person using a plastic bottle, one person catching an extra fish, or one person sharing personal data doesn't seem to matter. But when many people do the same thing, the effects add up. Each action feels harmless. The outcome is not. The paradox challenges the idea that good intentions always lead to good results. It also questions how much weight we should give to small, hidden consequences. If no one feels the harm, does it count? If the benefit is real and the harm is vague, is the action still wrong? Now imagine a version where the button helps someone directly, a cure for a child's illness, food for a starving family. The good is clear and strong, but the harm is still abstract. The world becomes slightly worse in ways we can't trace. Maybe people become less willing to help others without a button. Maybe it weakens the idea of effort and kindness. You can't point to the exact cost, but you're told it's there. So you have to ask, how should we make decisions when good and harm don't happen in the same place or at the same time? Can something be moral on its own, but dangerous in large numbers? Some people argue that morality should focus on what one person can control. If you help someone and cause no direct harm, you've done something good. Others say that's too narrow. They believe moral choices must account for long-term and group effects, even if they're hard to see. The button paradox shows how small, simple actions can become complex when repeated. It raises the question of responsibility in a world where personal choices link together. Pressing the button once seems kind. Pressing it a million times, spread across the world, might break something we didn't know we were touching. At some point in the distant past, there was no such thing as a human being. Then, at a later point, there were humans. So who was the first one? The Navel Paradox asks this question and exposes a strange problem. We can't find a clear line between what came before humans and what counts as human. Start with biology. Humans evolved gradually from earlier species over a long period of time. Each generation was almost the same as the one before it. A child was just a little different from their parents. At no point did a creature give birth to something completely new. So when did a non-human become a human? Imagine a line of creatures stretching back in time. Today's humans came from earlier Homo sapiens, who came from Homo erectus, and so on. Go back far enough and you reach creatures that clearly weren't human. But between then and now, the changes were slow and slight. The child of a non-human wasn't suddenly human. But at some point, we say the species changed. Where's the cutoff? That's the first part of the paradox, how to draw a line when change is continuous. It's like the paradox of the heap. If you remove one grain of sand at a time from a pile, when does it stop being a heap? In the case of evolution, the question is, when does a creature stop being almost human and become human? The second part comes from the image of the navel. Most humans have one because they were born from a mother through a placenta. But the first human, however we define them, must have come from non-human parents. If that person had a navel, it didn't come from the usual cause. If they didn't, they were different from every human after them. This adds another layer. The first human either had a body part they shouldn't, or they lacked a feature that most humans have. Either option is strange. But that's what happens when we try to apply sharp categories to slow, natural change. The paradox also shows up in legal and social contexts. If you had to decide when human rights apply in deep history, what would you say? Did the first human have language? Use fire? Make tools? What about emotions or rituals? At what point do those traits come together to say, now this is human? One way to respond is to say there was no first human. Instead, there was a population of almost humans who slowly gained the features we now use to define humanity. Over time, more of them shared those features. There's no sharp line, only a growing cluster of traits. Another view is to draw an arbitrary line for convenience. Scientists sometimes do this by choosing a fossil and saying, this is early Homo sapiens. It's not perfect, but it helps organize data. Still, the line is artificial. The creature before and after are almost the same. The Navel Paradox reminds us that nature doesn't work in neat categories. We make labels for clarity, but evolution ignores them. What looks like a clear beginning is actually a slow, silent shift. A demon appears to you one evening. It doesn't look scary. It's calm, polite, and speaks in a soft voice. It says, I want to help you live the best life possible. I'll give you advice, warn you of dangers, and guide your decisions. I know the future, and I'll only tell you what's true. You ask what it wants in return. It says, nothing. I just like helping. At first, the demon's advice is good. It tells you to avoid a bad investment. It suggests a new route to work that saves time. Over the weeks, its guidance improves your life. Friends notice. You're happier, healthier, more successful. The demon never lies, never misleads, and never asks for anything. But over time, a problem creeps in. You stop making decisions on your own. When you're unsure, you ask the demon. Even when you're not unsure, you still check. Soon, you stop thinking deeply about choices. You let the demon do the thinking. After all, it always knows best. That's the friendly demon paradox. The demon wants to help, and it does. But in helping too much, it begins to harm. It weakens your ability to choose, even though it never forces you. You give up freedom not because of pressure, but because of comfort. You can see this paradox in other forms. Think of a parent who does everything for their child. The child grows up safe, happy, and confident, but also unprepared to make hard choices alone. Or think of smart technology that suggests everything from songs to routes to meals. The suggestions are helpful, but over time, they shape your habits in ways you don't notice. You stop exploring. You follow. The paradox isn't about control. The demon never controls you. You could stop listening anytime, but you don't because it always seems better to listen. The very trust that makes the demon helpful also makes it dangerous. Trust turns into dependence. Dependence slowly replaces judgment. Now imagine you ask the demon, "Should I stop listening to you?" The demon answers honestly, "If you stop, your choices may become worse. You'll struggle more, but you'll grow." Now you face a strange question. Is it better to do well with help or do less well on your own? This is what makes the paradox so sharp. The demon is friendly. It never lies. It wants what's best for you. And that's exactly why the danger is hard to see. If it were cruel, you'd resist. If it lied, you'd stop trusting it. But because it's honest and kind, you keep listening until you no longer act on your own. The friendly demon paradox asks where the line is between guidance and surrender. At what point does help become harm, not by force, but by slowly replacing the need to think, choose, and act for yourself? The danger isn't the demon. It's forgetting how to live without it. A king asks his cartographers for a perfect map of the kingdom. He says it must show every river, every tree, every building, exactly where it is with nothing left out. The mapmakers work for years. At last, they return with their masterpiece. A map the same size as the kingdom itself. Every part of the land is represented at full scale. The king looks at it and says, "But this is useless." That's the perfect map paradox. The goal of a map is to simplify. It helps people understand a place by showing only the details they need. A road map shows highways. A weather map shows temperature or wind. No map shows everything. But if you tried to make a map that did, you'd lose what makes a map useful, its ability to leave things out. The paradox highlights a simple truth. More detail doesn't always mean more value. A perfect map, in the strictest sense, would need to match the territory exactly. It would need to show every blade of grass, every cloud in the sky, every insect crawling over every stone. That's not a tool, that's a duplicate. You can see the same problem in models or simulations. A weather model tries to predict tomorrow's rain. It uses past data, current readings, and math to give a useful guess. But if the model tried to include every possible variable, down to each grain of dust in the air, it would take longer to run than the weather takes to unfold. The model would be too complex to use. Or take language. Imagine a dictionary that tried to explain every possible shade of meaning for every word. If every word needed a page of notes and context, the dictionary would never end. You'd never finish reading it, and you'd never find what you need. The perfect map paradox isn't just about maps. It's about limits. It shows that all representations, maps, models, even thoughts must leave things out. And they should. The value of a tool comes from focus, not total coverage. Now imagine a teacher tries to teach a subject by covering every fact. The course takes years. The students forget most of it. But another teacher picks 10 key ideas, builds understanding around those, and the students leave with clear insight. The first course had more content. The second gave more understanding. A map of the whole world at full scale would be a second world. It would need roads, signs, buildings, just like the one it tries to copy. And someone would need a map to navigate that. The chain never ends. This paradox reminds us that knowledge depends on simplification. To understand a thing, we don't need to copy it. We need to see the parts that matter for our purpose. A good map isn't perfect. It's useful. It shows just enough to help us act. Trying to show everything often leaves us lost. You hear a short melody, maybe a jingle from an ad or the chorus of a pop song. Later, without meaning to, it plays in your mind on repeat. You didn't choose it. You don't want it. You can't stop it. That's an earworm. It's a piece of music that sticks in your head, sometimes for hours or even days. Here's the paradox. The more you try to forget the tune, the stronger it becomes. The harder you push it away, the more space it takes up in your mind. Trying not to think about it turns into a way of thinking about it. This is the Earworm Paradox. It shows what happens when attention turns against itself. It's like the command, don't think of a pink elephant. You have to think about it just to understand the instruction. The same happens with the earworm. To check if it's still in your head, you have to hum it again. That brings it back. The paradox sits at the edge of control. You don't invite the tune in. It shows up on its own, often triggered by a phrase, a sound, or nothing at all. It's a failure of mental boundaries. You are the one doing the thinking, but not the one choosing the thought. The loop usually comes from music that's short, simple, and repetitive. Songs with strong rhythm or unresolved tension, ones that seem to promise a next note, tend to stick. Your brain tries to complete the song, even if it never heard the full version. That drive to finish what feels incomplete keeps the loop going. Now imagine someone tells you that a certain song causes earworms in almost everyone. Just knowing that may cause it to appear in your head. The idea of the tune becomes the start of the tune. In that way, the earworm spreads like a mental virus. You catch it by knowing about it. There's also a strange comfort to it. Some people enjoy earworms. They feel familiar, even calming. But others find them distracting or stressful, especially when the same phrase loops over and over without stopping. The tune turns from pleasant to irritating, not because it changed, but because it won't leave. People try to solve the problem in many ways. Some hum a different tune. Some chew gum, which can reduce subvocal repetition. Others play the full song, hoping that completing it will shut the loop down. But none of these tricks work every time. The paradox remains. The thing you don't want in your head is there because you're trying not to think about it. The Earworm Paradox isn't just about music. It shows how thought can become stuck in a loop. The mind, trying to clear itself, can trap itself. It wants freedom but ends up circling the same path. The tune plays on, not because it's welcome, but because your own resistance keeps it alive. A king sends his trusted messenger to deliver an urgent command to a distant general. The message is sealed and clear: attack at dawn. The messenger rides hard, crossing rivers and hills, risking ambush and exhaustion. He arrives just before dawn and delivers the order. The general reads it, nods, and the army moves. But as the battle begins, the general realizes something strange. The enemy is retreating, not attacking. News soon arrives. The enemy had already surrendered the night before. The war ended while the messenger was still on the road. The king, if still alive, would have sent different orders of peace. But the message was already in motion, couldn't be changed. The general acted on instructions that were outdated the moment the battle started. This is the king's messenger paradox. It shows the problem of acting on information that was true when sent but false when received. The messenger did nothing wrong. He followed orders, took risks, and delivered the message on time. The general also acted correctly. He followed a clear, trusted command. Yet the outcome was failure. You see this problem in many forms today. A spacecraft launched with precise settings might take months or years to reach its target. If anything changes back on Earth, like calculations, tools, or goals, those changes can't reach the craft until another signal is sent. By then, the old signal may already have caused an irreversible move. The same holds for automated systems in factories or financial trading. A machine or algorithm may act on input that's slightly out of date, making good decisions for the wrong world. Or consider a legal system. A law passed based on the best knowledge of the time might cause harm when the facts shift. The law doesn't update itself, but people must follow it until someone catches up and changes it. The paradox forces a question. Who is responsible when failure comes from delay, not mistake? The king meant well. The messenger was loyal. The general was obedient. But their actions, though correct in isolation, led to damage. The problem was not in any one person, it was in time. One way to manage this is to allow for judgment at the point of action. If the general had known he could adapt the order based on new information, the battle might have been avoided. But that also invites risk. If everyone adjusts the king's words, chaos can follow. So the system relies on trust in the message, even when time changes the meaning. The king's messenger paradox explores how authority, truth, and time interact. It warns that even perfect systems can fail when the world moves faster than messages. The king cannot speak in real time. The messenger cannot stop the clock. The general must act even if the message is already part of a different past. A crocodile grabs a child playing near a river. The parent begs for the child back. The crocodile says, "I will return your child only if you correctly guess what I will do next." The parent replies, "You will not return my child." Now the crocodile faces a problem. If the crocodile planned to return the child, then the parent's guess is wrong, so the crocodile should not return the child. But if the crocodile planned not to return the child, then the parent's guess is correct. So by the crocodile's rule, it must return the child. Either way, the crocodile breaks its promise. This is the Crocodile Paradox. It's a self-referential trap where a simple condition creates a contradiction when applied to itself. The paradox is not about reptiles or rivers. It's about logic, truth, and rules that collapse when they try to handle predictions involving themselves. You can see the structure of the problem in modern logic and ethics. Imagine a judge says, "I will sentence you only if you correctly guess the outcome." If the accused says, "You will not sentence me," then the same loop appears. If the judge planned no sentence, then the guess is correct, and so a sentence must happen. But that makes the guess wrong. The system locks itself. At its core, the paradox shows the instability of rules that depend on self-referencing predictions. It's a cousin to the liar paradox, where someone says, "This sentence is false. If it's true, then it must be false. If it's false, then it must be true." The crocodile paradox works in the same space, but wraps it in a story of logic and consequences. It also raises questions about fairness and trust. The crocodile sets a rule that seems fair. Guess right and you win. But in making the rule depend on your prediction of its own action, it removes any stable outcome. The parent can't win, not because the guess is wrong, but because the system cannot handle a guess that hits too close to the rule's edge. In game theory, this paradox speaks to commitments and threats. If someone sets a rule based on what another person believes or predicts, the outcome can twist back and undo itself. Systems that try to act based on self-aware conditions, like AI models trained on human predictions, can also face similar loops. If the model acts based on what it thinks you expect, and you act based on what you think it expects you to expect, no one moves with confidence. The crocodile's challenge sounds simple. Guess what I will do, and I'll act according to your guess. But when the guess turns the rule back on itself, action becomes impossible. The crocodile becomes stuck. So does the parent. The paradox doesn't just trap the characters, it traps the logic that created the rule in the first place. A scientist invents a suit that makes a person invisible. Light passes through it as if nothing is there. No shadow, no outline, no trace. When someone wears it, they vanish completely from view. The suit works perfectly, but then a new question comes up. If no one can see the person, can they be seen at all? And if they can't be seen, do they still count as being there in the same way? That's the Invisibility Paradox. To see something is to know where it is, to react to it, to place it in space. We rely on sight to confirm presence. But if something can't be seen, how do we know it's real? A person in the invisible suit still has weight, still makes sound, still touches things. But because we can't see them, they become something like a ghost, half real, half imagined. If they stay still and silent, we might forget they exist. Visibility shapes how we respond to presence. Take it away, and presence becomes unstable. Now imagine two people in a room. One wears the suit. The other does not know they're there. Every word spoken by the invisible person is now eerie. Is it a voice? A thought? A trick? If you can't locate the speaker, you start to doubt what's real. The mind depends on vision to ground experience. When sight fails, trust breaks down. Here's another twist. If the suit is perfect, even the eyes of the wearer become invisible. That means they can't block light. But the eye works by absorbing light. If it lets light pass through, it stops functioning. The wearer can no longer see. So total invisibility means blindness. To become unseen, you must give up the ability to see. The paradox flips. To observe others while being unobserved, you must stop observing at all. That conflict shows up in science fiction often. A character uses invisibility to gain an edge, to sneak, to watch, but they still need to see. If the invisibility is perfect, it must cancel out that ability. Something has to give. Either the person can see and is partly visible, or is fully invisible and blind. Real invisibility can't have it both ways. Now take a broader view. What else becomes invisible in life, not by physics, but by neglect? Social workers, janitors, quiet neighbors, people who do necessary work but go unseen. They aren't physically invisible, but they're overlooked. Their presence is not registered. The paradox here is that being unseen can bring safety or power, but also erasure. You can move freely, but no one sees what you do. You're not held back, but not recognized either. The Invisibility Paradox asks whether being unseen frees you or removes you. If no one sees your actions, are you invisible or simply ignored? If you see the world but no one sees you, are you part of it or apart from it? In trying to vanish, you might also vanish from meaning. A man puts on a suit that makes him completely invisible. Light bends around him, leaving no shadow or outline. He walks through crowds, unseen. People move around him without knowing he's there. The suit works exactly as designed. But then a question comes up. What does it mean to exist in a space where no one can confirm you're there? This is the Invisibility Paradox. To exist physically is not always enough. People recognize you through presence, by seeing your face, noticing your body, watching your movements. When you're invisible, others can't respond to you. You become like air, present, but not acknowledged. You're in the room, but not part of it. Now take the case of someone using this power. Suppose she enters a meeting room wearing the suit. She hears private talks, watches gestures, sees documents passed from hand to hand. She gathers information freely. She influences nothing, but she knows everything. In that moment, she has power others don't. But that power depends on absence. The moment she speaks or touches something, she breaks the illusion. To stay powerful, she must remain silent, still, and unseen. The more invisible she is, the less she can do. That's the paradox, freedom without interaction. In some versions of the paradox, the wearer of the suit becomes blind. Light passes through the eyes without stopping. But to see, light must hit the eye and be absorbed. If the eye no longer absorbs light, it no longer works. So full invisibility cancels vision. To see, you must be seen, at least by the light. A perfect invisibility suit might work for others, but not for the person inside it. To stay invisible, you must give up your own perception. Now consider a person who feels invisible without any suit. In a crowded city, on a busy train, or inside a big company, someone might go unspoken to, unrecognized, uncounted. No one knows their name. No one remembers they were there. They follow the rules, do the work, go home. If they stopped showing up, maybe no one would ask why. Their invisibility isn't a gift. It's a form of absence created by neglect. They're not hidden by science, but by lack of notice. There's another twist. Someone might want to be invisible on purpose, to avoid danger, to protect privacy, or to watch without being watched. But staying invisible has a cost. You give up the ability to take part. No one interrupts you, but no one includes you. You're safe from judgment, but also from recognition. You're present, but not real in the eyes of others. The Invisibility Paradox raises a question about what it means to exist socially. If no one sees you, do you still matter? If you can't be noticed, can you belong? Whether the cause is a science fiction suit or a crowded world, the result is the same. You're there, but not part of the story anyone else sees. Everything seems to have a cause. A tree grows because someone planted a seed. The seed came from another tree. That tree grew from a seed before it. Every effect has a cause behind it. But if you keep going back, seed to tree to earlier seed, you hit a wall. What started it all? That's the first cause paradox. If everything needs a cause, then the beginning must also have one. But if the beginning has a cause, then it isn't really the beginning. It's just another step in a longer chain. On the other hand, if something didn't have a cause, if it just appeared without reason, that breaks the rule that everything comes from something. So either something came from nothing, or the chain of causes goes back forever. Neither answer feels complete. This paradox often comes up in debates about the origin of the universe. Some say the universe must have had a first cause, a point where everything began. Others argue that causes must stretch back endlessly, with no true start. But if the chain never started, how did we get here? And if it did start, what caused the starting point? One common answer is to say that the first cause is different from everything else. It doesn't need a cause. It just exists on its own. Some call this first cause God, or some eternal force that exists outside time and space. But that answer still faces a question. Why should we accept that this first thing doesn't need a cause, when everything else does? Imagine a row of dominoes. You knock over the first one and the rest fall in a line. You ask what started the chain. The answer is simple, you did. But what if no one knocked over the first domino? What if the line stretched back forever? That removes the need for a first push, but now you have an infinite row. Can an infinite row exist in the real world? Some philosophers say that time and space might not work the way we assume. Maybe the question, what caused the first event, doesn't make sense because time itself began with that first event. Asking what came before time is like asking what's north of the North Pole. The question points outside the system it belongs to. Others suggest that cause and effect might break down at the very beginning. In quantum physics, some events don't seem to have causes in the normal way. Things happen randomly without a clear trigger. If the universe began in such a state, then maybe asking for a cause isn't the right kind of question. The first cause paradox presses against our need for answers. It shows that our idea of cause and effect might not stretch all the way back. At some point, the chain either loops, stretches forever, or stops with no cause. Each answer feels hard to accept. But the question remains, why is there something instead of nothing? And what made the first thing move? A group of scientists builds a time capsule. They fill it with objects, letters, photos, and a video message. Their goal is simple: to show people in the future what life was like in the present. They bury the capsule deep underground, mark the site, and leave instructions to open it in 500 years. Centuries pass. A team in the future finds the capsule, opens it, and begins to study its contents. They see clothing styles, outdated slang, forgotten technologies. They listen to the video message. One person says, "This is what we believed. This is how we lived." But then someone else in the group says, "How do we know this is true? Maybe they planted lies. Maybe they made this to trick us." That's the time capsule paradox. You send a message through time, but once it arrives, no one can confirm its truth. The senders are long dead. The events described are past. The capsule could be honest or fake, and there's no way to check. The people who receive the message must decide whether to trust it. But trust is hard when you have no way to ask questions or look for proof. Any record, once removed from the people who made it, becomes open to doubt. You see the effect but can't reach the cause. Now imagine someone in the past creates a false time capsule on purpose. They fill it with lies. They pretend their society was peaceful when it wasn't. They hide key facts, or they invent a story that casts themselves as heroes. Hundreds of years later, people find the capsule and believe it. That fake story becomes history. Or flip it. Suppose the capsule is true, but so strange that the future finds it unbelievable. A peaceful culture, now long gone, wrote about how they solved war and poverty. But the future, living in a world full of conflict, sees the message as fiction. They laugh at the capsule, thinking it must be propaganda. The paradox appears because time removes accountability. A time capsule speaks from a time that no longer exists. It sends a frozen message into a moving world. Those who made it are beyond correction. Those who receive it must judge without contact. This issue is broader than metal boxes in the ground. The internet now stores vast amounts of information. A tweet, a blog post, or a video might be found years from now, taken as fact or as fraud, depending on the context. The farther a message travels from its source, the less control the source has over how it's read. The time capsule paradox reveals a gap between intent and interpretation. The people who create the message want to be understood, but the people who receive it bring their own views, biases, and doubts. Even a simple statement can be misunderstood across time. A time capsule tries to preserve truth, but in doing so, it gives up the tools of dialogue, clarification, correction, discussion. What survives is a one-sided voice, hoping the future listens, and hoping the future believes. A reader opens a book and begins to read. The story is long and rich. Each chapter builds on the one before it. The characters grow, make mistakes, change. The world expands. Tension builds. Questions pile up. Then, finally, the reader reaches the last page. Everything comes together. The ending gives meaning to what came before. But here's the problem. That last page changes how the whole story is understood. What you thought was a mistake turns out to be a clue. A quiet character becomes central. A joke early on now feels like foreshadowing. So if the meaning of the story depends on the last page, did you really understand the book before reaching it? That's the last page paradox. You can't fully grasp the beginning without the end, but you have to go through the beginning to reach the end. Every page shapes the next, but the last one reshapes them all. Meaning flows forward through time, but also backward, once the final moment is revealed. This happens often in fiction. A mystery novel may seem scattered until the final twist reveals how everything fits. A tragedy may hide its weight until the closing lines show the cost. After the last page, the reader looks back and says, "Now I see what it was really about." But until that point, they were in the dark or at least partly mistaken. The paradox also appears in life. People try to make sense of their past. A failure in youth might seem pointless until it leads to success later. A relationship might seem perfect until it ends suddenly and casts a shadow over earlier memories. The last part rewrites the first. But you can't live life backward. You make choices without knowing how they'll look in the end. Imagine a biography written before someone dies. Tells a full story, so it seems, but then something unexpected happens near the end. One action changes public opinion. One event redefines a legacy. Now the earlier story looks different, even though nothing in the past changed. The final chapter alters the shape of the whole. Even a simple experience shows this pattern. You watch a movie. It's slow, confusing, and messy. But the final scene ties everything together in one clear moment. You walk away with a strong feeling, not because each scene was strong, but because the ending gave it structure. The last page didn't just finish the story, it gave it shape. The last page paradox reveals how endings act like lenses. They don't just close the story, they color everything that came before. Yet to reach that lens, you have to walk through uncertainty, guessing as you go. Until the end arrives, meaning is incomplete. After it arrives, meaning feels inevitable. But you can only reach that view by first not knowing. A museum collects objects to preserve the past. Each item in its halls, a painting, a tool, a broken cup, was once part of someone's everyday life. In the museum, these things become symbols. A chair is no longer just a chair. It's a marker of style, wealth, or labor from a specific time and place. The museum slows down time. It turns what was once ordinary into something worth protecting. But here's the paradox. The act of preserving an object often removes it from its meaning. A sword behind glass no longer threatens. A ritual mask no longer dances. A child's toy, once handled with care or rough joy, sits still in perfect lighting. The object survives, but the life around it doesn't. To save the item, we take it out of use. And in doing so, we risk turning something living into something silent. That's the museum paradox. We save the past by freezing it, but freezing it can make it harder to understand. Imagine someone finds a worn-out cooking pot in a ruined home. In its time, it fed a family. It burned stews, boiled water, maybe once fell from a shelf in a loud crash. But now it's tagged, placed on a shelf, and admired for its age. The story it once told, the smells, the heat, the hunger is gone. In trying to honor the object, we strip it of its voice. Museums also choose what to display. Space is limited, so curators pick what they think matters. But those choices shape our view of history. If one culture's work is shown more than another's, or if certain types of objects are favored, paintings over tools, royal items over common ones, we get a tilted picture of the past. We think we're seeing what was important, but really we're seeing what someone chose to keep. Now imagine someone builds a museum of today. They collect smartphones, fast food wrappers, protest signs, and office chairs. People laugh at first, How could those things be museum-worthy? But in 100 years, those items will feel distant. They'll need context to be understood. What we take for granted now may look strange later. And unless we explain how they were used, what they meant, and who used them, future visitors will only see the surface. There's also the problem of preservation itself. Some materials rot, fade, or rust. Others are replaced by digital versions. But even digital files can be lost if the formats become unreadable or the devices break. So we try to preserve, but we can never preserve everything. Every museum is a selection. Every selection has gaps. The museum paradox shows the tension between memory and removal. To keep something safe, we take it out of life. To help others understand it, we risk simplifying it. We walk through these halls not just to see the past, but to see how we choose to remember it, and what gets left behind.